Hoarse coughs disrupted the heavy surroundings as dying flames crackled quietly across the corpse-littered ground. A body stirred amongst the rubble and ash as one bloodied hand reached up to sweep aside dirtied locks of blonde hair. "Is he dead, Kurama?" The demon fox's voice was faint when the answer came like a whisper in his head. "As dead as he can possibly be, Kit. Even his body's been completely destroyed." A pause followed for several heartbeats. "But we're not far behind either." A dry half-chuckle was offered at this statement as Naruto heaved himself into a sitting position, ignoring the blood that dripped from his wounds and joined the dark crimson already staining the battlefield. "No doubt. I can practically feel our chakra leaking away. Can't believe how strong that bastard was." The fox didn't reply, and under normal circumstances, Naruto would have been worried that the demon merged with him now found it too exhausting to even speak. Instead, the blonde turned dull blue eyes to the broken figure lying only a few feet away, a hole in his chest, limbs twisted in an ugly rendition of a rag doll. Naruto released a bitter scoff at this, too drained to even consider crying for his fallen best friend. He hadn't cried since his godfather had died. The irony here was painful. Once upon a time, he had been the one struck down like this, almost killed by the very attack that Madara had slaughtered Sasuke with not even an hour ago. And the Chidori hadn't even been aimed at the raven-haired Anbu general in the first place. His stupidly proud, unbelievably protective, brilliant best friend had jumped in the way at the last second. "Hey Kit." Naruto blinked slowly, pulling his wayward thoughts back together as the Kyuubi's soft, almost wavering voice thrummed in his mind. "What is it? What do you think you're doing?" The blonde frowned, dragging himself over to some leftover debris to lean against a slab of fallen rock. He doubted he could stand anymore. "What does it look like?" "There's nothing left. Konoha's gone. Madara's gone. Not much left to do but wait until I go too." A feeble snort batted at him, somehow managing to convey the same amount of annoyance the Kyuubi once did at full strength. "That's a pathetic way to die. And I for one am not going to just roll over and wait until death takes us like some common dog." Naruto would have rolled his eyes if he had the energy left to do so. "Don't think we have much choice, Kurama. Unless you want me to commit traditional suicide." A growl berated him. "Think, you damn brat. Last time I checked, you were a Fuinjutsu master. What were you working on after that pervert of a Sannin was killed?" Naruto blinked, mind sluggishly retrieving the memory of a complex seal he had started on after Jiraiya had died. In his grief, he had holed himself up in his apartment and had gone through stacks of paper and numerous jars of ink in a half-crazed attempt at reversing the event of the Toad Sannin's death. It had been a stupid thing to do, and he had always known, in the back of his mind, that he would never go through with it. One man's death, no matter how precious to him, was not worth erasing his other friends' futures. He had put it aside after a week and a furious beatdown from a subtly panicking Sasuke once the Uchiha had managed to break through his seals and into his apartment. But now, what was there to lose? "I have no paper, no ink," he thought stupidly even as he cleared a rough patch of ground in front of him. "And it takes a huge amount of chakra. And it might not even work. You have blood, Kit. And we still have enough chakra to pull this off if we pour everything we have into it. I'll be damned if you won't at least try. We have nothing to lose anymore." Focusing now on the seal he had come up with years ago seemed to lift the haze fogging his mind. Naruto held no doubts that it was mostly a last rush of adrenaline that forced him to concentrate even as his life continued to slip away like sand through spread fingers. But his hand was steady as he drew out the seal in his own blood. He only paused when he started drawing the time frame of the jump. Originally, he had drawn it out to be before Nagato's attack on the Toad Sannin, but if he was going to travel back, he might as well do it properly. "Kurama, how many years do you think we can jump?" "A decade, maybe a little more than that," the fox responded after a considering pause. "And it would be easier if you jumped back to a significant point in time." "Significant to you, I mean." Naruto remained still. The day of the Kyuubi attack was out of the question. That had been a significant date, and he had played a large part in it, but he had also just been a baby. There was no way he could jump back so far to a time he couldn't even remember. The Uchiha massacre was also impossible. As much as he wished to spare his best friend the loss of his family, he hadn't known Sasuke back then, and the Uchiha clan's destruction had never affected him directly. The best date to jump back to would probably be the day he had been assigned to Team 7. It had been one of the happiest days of his life, and had occurred before everything had gone downhill. Good choice, Kurama approved. It will take every last drop of chakra we have, but that is a strong point in time. It will serve as an anchor for us. Naruto nodded absently and quickly drew out the correct symbols before finishing the rest of the seal. His hand dropped back into his lap, studying the seal with a critical eye for any mistakes. Kurama, where will I end up once I get back? My apartment? On the streets of Konoha? He frowned. In my 12-year-old body? I can't do anything like that. The demon fox was quiet for a long moment, the silence contemplative. You will most likely still have your own body, the Kyuubi admitted eventually. Seals this strong consist of symbols, chakra, and the user's own desires. You wish for the ability to save your friends and family, as well as the village you call home. To do so, you would need the knowledge of this future and the abilities you have gained along the way. But to retain this self, you risk a paradox, where there will be two Uzumaki Narutos running around in the same timeline. That should not happen at all. It should not be possible. But it will happen, Naruto thought back fiercely. I am going to change it all. Yes, Kit, I understand that. Kurama replied with a surprising amount of patience. And your desire to prevent another war of this magnitude and the eventual deaths of everyone around you will be strong enough to keep the paradox at bay. But it will not last forever. Your ultimate goal is Uchiha Madara. The things you change along the way will either help you towards this goal or simply hasten the inevitability of the same thing happening once again. Time will always try to reduce diversion. You could prove to be strong enough to end up creating a completely different timeline, or prove too weak and end up with the same results. Time does not like being tampered with. But whichever outcome you end up with, it does not change the fact that you do not belong in that timeline. When your job is finished, for better or for worse, time will close the loop and you will simply cease to exist as you are. As to where you will end up, that I cannot know. Naruto had remained almost unresponsive throughout this entire explanation. Now he sighed, the movement causing a wave of agony to his already damaged lungs. I don't think I really mind, he thought detachedly. I've lived long enough. The only reason I want to go back is because this could be a chance to give everyone a different future. A better one, but if I am to disappear, you will disappear with me. I thought you wanted to live? A derisive scoff echoed in his mind as the Kyuubi shifted irritably. Only fools and cowards wish to live forever and I am neither nor both. I simply do not wish to die due to a murder-suicide and at the hands of Uchiha Madara no less. At this moment in time, we have accomplished nothing more than ridding a broken world of a madman who still succeeded in the end. When I finally leave this plane of existence for the next to meet my maker so to speak, I would like a little more than murder to my name. And since those higher beings up there seem hopelessly enamored with such pathetically weak humans such as yourself, preventing the apocalypse from wiping out your pitiful kind would be excellent fodder to throw back into their faces. Amusement stirred in Naruto's chest as the insults flew past him without harm. He was far too used to the Kyuubi reiterating his stance on humans to care. You don't seem to like those higher beings very much. I don't. They allow 9 demons to form in a world where much weaker creatures roam and give us unlimited power only to condemn us to an imprisoned life in a human container because we brought destruction to those who sought to destroy us. There is neither logic nor intelligence in their decision. No doubt, once I pass on, they will try to condemn me for said destruction. Father's word alone won't be enough for all that I have done. A dark smile curved the fox's mouth. But with this, I shall be ready to face them. Naruto just shook his head. He had never asked Kurama about any of the higher beings on high, simply because he had no interest in them. As far as he was concerned, he carved his own path in life and he would deal with any judgment dealt to him when the time came. Alright then, are you ready? Immediately, the demon fox settled down and the Kyuubi's golden cloak enveloped him along with his own chakra mass. Naruto focused on the seal, one hand pressing over it as he concentrated on that fateful spring day 14 years ago when he had finally made Genin. Chakra flared around him and the seal flared up under his hand. Gritting his teeth, he forced as much chakra as he possibly could into the seal, ignoring the immediate warning bells that told him when he was at his limit. This technique would take everything he had. All around him, the world exploded into a blinding landscape of white, the very air around him trembling with energy. An invisible force seemed to close around him, and Naruto only had a moment to wonder, distantly, whether or not he would end up arrested and in a prison cell before the day was up. And then, with a deafening roaring ringing in his ears that Naruto instinctively knew to be the rush of time, darkness engulfed him and he knew no more. Kit, wake up, you lazy midget-sized pathetic excuse for a midday snack. Wake up this instant. Blue eyes snapped open and Naruto jerked up, almost banging his head against a low-hanging branch. With a low groan, the blonde's hands reached up to clutch at his head as a jackhammer set off inside his skull. God damn it, you stupid fox. I'm awake. What do you want? A snort, and Naruto could almost see Kurama stretching smugly in his mindscape. We're back, Kit. Just thought you want to get a move on. You've been out for 3 hours. I was getting bored. Naruto would have shot something derogatory back at the demon if he hadn't been caught up in the fact that he was back. Because he knew this forest, knew it like the back of his hand. He was at the very edges of the forest of death in the shadows of one of the trees, and from his position, he could see the rest of Konoha, real and bustling with life spread out before him. Kurama, we did it. Another snort, this one more of fond amusement than anything else, sounded in his mind. Yes, kid, that's what I said. And it seems your wounds have disappeared. You have your scar to prove it, of course, not to mention that your clothes are abysmal, but your chakra reserves are almost back to normal, and I feel better than I have in a long time. Naruto couldn't quite help the small grin that tilted his lips as he staggered to his feet, tugging absently at the torn clothing that hung off his restored if worn frame. He hadn't felt happy in a long time, and it had been even longer since he had shown it openly, but this was it. This could be everything he had ever wanted, and the best part was that his younger self could grow up, ascend the ranks, and become Hokage without half as much suffering as he had gone through. This time, Uzumaki Naruto would have his friends around him, supporting him, and there would be no war to take away the millions of lives that had been lost in that other timeline. What will you do first? Naruto blinked, frowning thoughtfully as his eyes drank in his village. The old man, at least one person will have to know who I am. And I still have Ba-chan's necklace to show him. He's reasonable. I'll be able to convince him. The fox made a sound of agreement. Go on then. I'm going to sleep. Try not to get killed between here and the Hokage tower. If anyone could, it would be you. Naruto rolled his eyes before performing a henge. His blonde hair faded to normal brown. Blue eyes quickly turned brown as well, and his clothes matched those of an everyday civilian. His henge was also a few inches shorter, but his frame was the same slender build. All in all, he looked harmless and nondescript. Thankfully, he was already inside the barrier that sensed chakra signatures around Konoha. He just had to avoid an shinobi coming from the training grounds, as there were no guards at the entrance to the training ground district from the village. Naruto did his best to not look at anything or anyone, though he longed just to soak it all in. Still, Naruto hurried along the streets of Konoha, not lingering as he hurried towards the Hokage tower. He would not be able to get in like everyone else as he had no identification on himself, but his gaze flitted to the open window of the Hokage's office, his eyes quickly pinpointing the small squad of Anbu on guard duty at the moment. Casually, he turned left, putting him parallel to his destination even as he disappeared from the Anbu guard's line of sight. And then, with a quick half step to turn back towards the tower, Naruto pushed off from the ground, flashing past the guards and through the open window before coming to a halt in front of a startled Sarutobi Hiruzen in a burst of wind disturbing he paperwork, sending it all over the room. It was so easy that it would have been funny if Naruto didn't know this also meant that if he had been an enemy, the third Hokage would have been dead before anyone could have reacted. Speaking of reaction, Naruto already had his arms in the air in the universal sign of surrender as Anbu appeared around him moments after. Kunai extended and pointed at several vital areas in his neck. Sarutobi had risen to his feet, eyes narrowed at him, body tense as his sharp gaze assessed the intruder. Hokage-sama, Naruto started formally. I mean you no harm, but I have something of great importance to speak to you about. If you would allow me to show you something, I would ask you to consider granting me a private audience with yourself. The Sandame stared hard at the brown-haired man, observing the now obvious henge. This man, obviously a ninja, had entered his office before any of his Anbu had even been able to react, and then had stood still while his guards had surrounded him. If he had meant any actual or immediate harm, this man could have already done it. Wordlessly, Sarutobi nodded curtly, keeping his eyes on the man as one of the ninja's hands slowly reached into a hidden pocket and withdrew a necklace. Sarutobi immediately stiffened, recognizing the necklace instantly. "Where did you get that?" he demanded as he came around his desk and contemplated whether or not the man would give it up without fuss. The hanged nin held out the necklace without hesitation. From a slug currently on quite the losing streak. Sarutobi's eyes widened at the analogy and he studied the brown eyes for a moment longer. This man knew Tsunade, and while an enemy ninja could just as easily have gotten this information, he also knew his former student would never give up this necklace to some random shinobi. With a decisive nod, he turned to his Anbu guards. "Wait outside," he ordered, ignoring the silent protest that immediately flared up. "Go, I can handle this." Reluctantly, the Anbu withdrew, and once they had left the office, Sarutobi quickly activated the privacy seals set up around the room. He turned back to the stranger, blinking in shock as the henge dropped and a tall, slender-framed blonde with piercing blue eyes stared back at him, a puzzling sort of affection tilting his lips. "Minato," Sarutobi whispered, taking a shaky step back. The blonde sighed, brushing a stray lock of hair away from his face. "Not quite, old man. Try his son. I'm Naruto." The Sandaime quickly pulled his thoughts together, steadying himself in the present as he studied the man in front of him. Now that he took the time, he could see the differences between the Yondaime and this blonde. While the two had the same hair and eyes, this man, Naruto, was more slender than and not as broad-shouldered as Minato had been. His jawline and facial structure were deceivingly delicate but also held the same strength Minato had had. And the faint smile that still quirked the blonde's lips as the man waited patiently for him to finish his observations was all Kushina. Absently, Sarutobi wondered if his laugh would be like Minato's. "If what you say is true," Sarutobi finally voiced carefully, "then you must be from the future." Naruto nodded, the slightest flicker of relief flitting across his features. "Yes, 14 years in the future to be exact, give or take a few months." Here, the blonde hesitated before forging on. "You could ask me some questions to make sure." Sarutobi didn't think anyone could pull off this sort of henge, and not many people knew Minato and Kushina even had a son, not to mention that the whisker markings on the blonde's face and the distinct Kyuubi chakra he could now sense inside the younger man were dead giveaways, but a few identity questions couldn't hurt either. "Who were your parents?" Again, that faint smile appeared briefly, and Sarutobi frowned inwardly at this implication. Naruto had always been optimistic, and always had a ready smile for all. For his expressions to have faded to a mere shadow of what it once was, still is now, was a clear indication that things in the future had not turned out well. "Namikaze Minato and Uzumaki Kushina." Sarutobi nodded. "Your godfather and godmother?" This time, a shadow of pain and deep sorrow darkened the cerulean eyes before that too disappeared. "Raya and Tsunade." Sarutobi blinked, startled. "He lets you call him Raya." Naruto, for it really could be no one else, blinked back. "Well, I also call him Ero Sennin, but after I did that a couple of times in front of those women he tries to get to as well as a few dignitaries, he finally told me I could call him Raya instead, at least while in front of other people." The blonde scoffed a bit. "There's nothing wrong with Raya. It's not perverted or degrading or anything. It's just a nickname. If he hadn't told me that he didn't let anyone else call him that, I would have ignored him altogether." Sarutobi chuckled, finally relaxing entirely. "I used to call him that, but he insisted on his full name after he turned 15. He thought the name sounded too female, and I believe Tsunade somehow teased him enough when they were younger that Jiraiya now has the irrational impression that the name is a patronizing insult to his sense of self. Or something of that sort anyway." He paused before continuing softly, "You two must have been very close." The blue gaze darkened once again even as the blonde nodded curtly. "Yes." Sarutobi nodded and made no further comment on the matter, instead taking in the ripped clothing the ninja was wearing. "Very well. I believe who you are. Now, how have you come back and why? Are things really that bad in the future?" Naruto closed his eyes briefly before nodding. "Konoha is gone," he said simply even as Sarutobi frowned at this revelation. "Razed to the ground. Its civilians and shinobi all dead. I was the last." For a moment, Sarutobi couldn't breathe as he tried to imagine a world where Konoha no longer existed. He glanced at the window towards the rest of the village before looking back at the blonde. It wasn't just the inner strength that was so like Minato, Sarutobi realized, because Kushina had had that strength as well. It was Naruto's entire bearing that reminded him most of Konoha's yellow flash. This man currently standing in front of him, frame relaxed but ready, had the air of a cage, and a powerful one at that. The kind of power that Sarutobi had only ever seen peoples of Minato's level exude. It did not escape his notice that he had not answered his first question. "You became Hokage then?" Sarutobi couldn't help but inquire. Naruto inclined his head in affirmation. "Rokudame Hokage." The haunted look passed over the blonde's features once more. "Just in time to watch my village burn." Sarutobi almost shuddered at the near-overwhelming grief in the younger man's voice. It was always hardest on the cage when their people's lives were lost. The entire village was their responsibility after all. "I came back to change it." Naruto suddenly looked almost anxious, and Sarutobi found himself relieved as he caught a glimpse of the Naruto he knew in this time. The Sandame nodded briskly, turning to step back behind his desk. "Of course. If Konoha will fall, then we will have to find a way to prevent it. But not now. Can I assume that nothing drastic will happen in the immediate future?" Naruto frowned in confusion but nodded nonetheless. "Everything will start going downhill at the next Chunin exams. Before that, as long as I keep an eye on things and root out some spies, things should be alright." "Good." Sarutobi pulled out a list of empty apartments and sent a reassuring look when Naruto stared in bewilderment at his assessment. "If nothing will happen anytime soon, I would like to get you settled in. You look ready to keel over, Naruto." The blonde blinked before looking down at himself. "Oh, I just finished fighting Ma." Sarutobi put up a hand to halt the younger man's explanation. "Not now, Naruto." He chided gently. "No doubt, if you continue, I will have many questions for you and we will be in here for another few hours. Right now, you need rest, not to mention we still have to create a background for you." Naruto seemed to consider this for a moment before nodding silently in agreement. "Very well. While you are here, you will need to use a different name. Do you have one in mind?" "Kazama Haruki," Naruto said after a moment's thought. "That's the name I used when I infiltrated Iwagakure." Sarutobi opened his mouth to ask before shaking his head ruefully. Questions later. But who knew Naruto had the potential to be a spy? "Alright," he continued on. "I'll write up the necessary papers and tell anyone who asks that you've been on a mission for me for the past 8 years. We can use the Hyuga affair. You know what that is? Good. We can use that and say you've been in Kumo to make sure they wouldn't try anything again." "They won't try anything again, will they?" Naruto shook his head. "They won't be stealing any more Hyuga anyway. But the council will want proof." Sarutobi frowned. "Indeed. Is there any knowledge from the future that you can use here?" Naruto stayed silent, gaze flickering over to the window to stare absently out at the sky. "How long can you keep the council at bay before they start asking questions?" Sarutobi shrugged. "As long as you keep a low profile, word won't get back to them too quickly, but even if it does, I can hold them off for several days, maybe a week." Naruto nodded. "Alright, give me 5 days. I can get to Kumo and back within that time. And I'll bring back Hyuga Hazashi's body. The bastards preserved it so I'll still be able to present an actual body." If Sarutobi had been anything other than a cage, he would have gaped. 5 days to Kumo and back? That's got to be a new record, wouldn't they keep that well guarded? Naruto shrugged. "I can do it, old man. I'm above Anbu level, plus I've done it before. And I'll leave a body clone behind so they won't notice. As long as the Hyuga clan doesn't go flaunting it through the streets of Kumo, everything should be fine." The Sandame considered this for a few seconds before nodding in agreement. "Alright, I'll call a council meeting when you get back. You'll leave tomorrow?" The blonde nodded. "And I'll be back in 5 days. Good. Now for your looks. The village will be in an uproar if they get a good look at you. At first, and maybe even second and third glance, you look very much like Minato." Naruto frowned thoughtfully before performing a few one-handed seals. His long golden locks immediately washed away, leaving a crimson fire in its wake, and the whisker marks faded from his face. The new redhead cocked a questioning eyebrow at the surprised Sandame. Sarutobi smiled and nodded approvingly. While there were still traces of both Minato and Kushina on the former blonde's features, anyone would just dismiss it as a coincidence if they noticed. He couldn't detect the henge either, which was curious. This henge of yours is very advanced. It should do the trick, though I admit it struck a familiar chord in me. He trailed of his Haruki, he reminded himself, smiled at him seemingly amused. That's because you have seen it before, old man. This is Tsunade Obaken's true henge jutsu. Rather than one layer around the body, it creates layers at a cellular layer, thus making too many to see through and too many to break. As a plus, the chakra drain and concentration is reflexive. The chakra layer is so small that it blends in with the natural chakra aura of a person. The Sharingan and Byakugan won't be able to pierce its veil. She gifted it to me before my infiltration mission. It was decided that each Hokage should pass on more than the will of fire as a legacy to the next. Each also gives the means to make it burn brighter. Sarutobi smiled at that, a sincere and satisfied smile. I am incredibly proud of Tsunade for starting such a tradition. I can only hope something we left behind proved useful. Haruki's smile faded at that. Each Hokage contributed personally at the time. And though I don't think I want to allow the circumstance to happen again that allowed this, he stopped and fixed the Sandame with a pointed look. I intend to continue this tradition. The Hokage frowned at this but reminded himself that he would get his answers later. Moving on to where you will be staying then. I'll take the apartment next to my younger counterpart. Sarutobi blinked. How did you? Oh. Right. Are you sure? Very. This way, I'll be able to keep an eye on him. Keep him company too. He'll get lonely sometimes. And as I said, I plan on continuing the tradition. The Sandame frowned sadly but said nothing. He had a feeling this Naruto wouldn't appreciate it. Very well. Just show these papers to the landlady there, and she'll give you the keys. He smiled warmly at the redhead. This Naruto exuded a quiet strength and seemed comfortable in his own skin. He had grown up well. And if what I can perceive of you is any indication, his training is in good hands. Get some rest, Naruto. Haruki Hokage-sama, he corrected with a smirk. Naruto offered that faint half-smile again before tucking Tsunade's necklace away and withdrawing a small paper seal instead, extending it towards Sarutobi. The Sandame blinked, taking the seal and noting the complex design. Just press it against any piece of clothing you wear and it will automatically imprint itself onto the material, Naruto explained quietly. If you are ever in trouble, sending even a drop of your chakra into the seal will automatically inform me of your position and I will be able to step to your location in an instant. Sarutobi examined the seal curiously before pressing it to his cage cloak's inside collar. A flash of chakra and the ink on the paper dissolved, reappearing on the cloak instead. What does it do? This time, Naruto's smile held the faintest traces of mischief and Sarutobi found himself hard-pressed not to smile back in the face of such familiarity. Try it. Reaching up, Sarutobi sent a small current of chakra into the seal and then almost stepped back when Naruto appeared beside him, a quiet crackle of dry lightning as his only warning. Wide-eyed, Sarutobi stared between the spot the redhead had been and the spot where he was now standing. Hiraishin. Naruto was already shaking his head. One of my own actually, although it is similar to the Hiraishin. I call it Raiko Hitakari no Jutsu, lightning step jutsu. Same effect but accomplished in a different way. Enemies rarely see it coming. The seal helps me lock onto the location, but if I have a very clear picture of where I'm going in my head when I perform the jutsu, I can get there just as easily. The location seal I gave you will degrade over time, but I can show you how to make it. It is keyed to me, which will help. I did eventually learn the Hiraishin as well, but it's more chakra intensive and restricted to seal use. Sarutobi was speechless for several seconds. While he knew that this Naruto was essentially an adult version of the 12-year-old Naruto, it was still hard to connect the two. To think that Naruto would one day grow up to create his own jutsu, a thrum of pride rushed through the Sandame. This is amazing. The younger man seemed to brighten a little, blue eyes glowing with momentary pride at the compliment. Thanks, old man. Sarutobi nodded before making a shooing motion at the redhead. Alright, go on then. We'll figure everything else out later. Get some sleep. And, he reached into one drawer and withdrew a wallet, deactivating the seal with a flick of his hand before offering several bills. Buy some clothes and food. That should be enough for a month, and then you can start doing missions to earn your own money. Naruto eyed the bills before accepting them with a nod of thanks. I'll pay you back, old man. Sarutobi would have refused if he wasn't certain Naruto would be stubborn about it. So he simply nodded in acknowledgement, deactivating the privacy seals as Naruto, now Haruki, sketched a simple salute before jumping out the window and disappearing over the rooftops within seconds. Hokage-sama? Sarutobi glanced absently at his bodyguards as they slipped back into the office. He waved a dismissive hand in the air as he sat back down and started on a new stack of paperwork. One of my spies. He had to pull out quite suddenly though, so I was not expecting him. I sent him out a long time ago and haven't seen him in a while. He was also under a henge and it took me a moment to realize who he was. Now I better start on this. I swear, the paperwork grows every time I turn around. The Anbu on guard duty seemed to accept this easily enough as they relaxed and moved back into the shadows again, some almost palpably amused at Sarutobi's grumbling. But even as he started scanning a request for new medical equipment at the hospital, Sarutobi contemplated the few things he had learned in the last 20 minutes. Dark times lay ahead, waiting in shadowed corners. But perhaps, with the time traveler's help, a man who seemed both familiar and foreign to him at the moment, they would somehow manage. Sasuke. He fell back, horror twisting his heart as a familiar figure shoved him away, darting in front of the oncoming Chidori. Sasuke, no. Move. The raven-haired general glanced back a heartbeat before the attack struck, a smirk playing on the man's lips even as Sharingan eyes met cerulean. And then blue-white lightning seemed to explode in front of them, engulfing the Uchiha as Madara's hand thrust clean through Sasuke's chest. Streaks of lightning spread outward like snakes, wrapping around arms and legs and twisting them to awkward angles. Through it all, he stayed frozen to the ground, breath frozen in his lungs as the lightning died and a broken body tilted backwards. He barely managed to pull enough brain cells together to catch the deadweight before the general hit the ground. Sasuke? His eyes drifted to the gaping bloody hole in the Uchiha's chest, seeing the damning injury and smelling the sickening scent of burnt flesh but not comprehending. This was Sasuke, his teammate, his rival, his best friend, his brother, and this was not supposed to happen. Don't you dare! Shocked blue eyes flickered back up to meet dull onyx, the light inside them fading fast even as the Uchiha's gaze clung desperately to his. Don't you dare! Sasuke rasped again, crimson spilling from his mouth and staining his lips. Let him win, Naruto. And then he was gone, black eyes becoming sightless as the last spark of life spluttered and died, his entire body turning slack. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't hear anything as he strained his ears in vain to catch the telltale breaths from the prone figure he was crouching over save for the harsh raucous laughter of the man standing only steps away from them. He's gone now too, Naruto-kun. Another one you led to his death. Another one you killed. When will you learn your lesson? It is futile to stand against me. This one's last of your pawns too, is he not? Or do you have another one to Sakura? In the next moment, all he could hear was screaming and he barely registered that the agonized sounds splitting the air were coming from his own throat as he hurtled at the mocking figure with a vengeance, insanity threatening to conquer his mind. Yet still he could hear the sound of mad laughter, cutting into him with terrifying accuracy because Madara was right, it was his fault again. And once more he had lost another of his precious people, lost the last of whom he had sworn to protect. With a choked-off cry, Haruki shot up in his bed, momentarily disoriented and drenched in sweat as he gasped for breath. One shaky hand reached up to cover his eyes, mentally pushing the most recent of his former life's memories back. He could still feel his chakra presence in the air that he had unwillingly released, now thankful for the privacy and chakra-dampening seals he had put in place the night before. Sasuke had been the last of his friends to go, loyal and unwavering to the very end. They had battled for 3 days straight, pulling out every trump card and strategy they could think of. Yet it seemed for every tactic they used Madara was prepared for it. Even rallying after Kabuto and Obito's demise was not enough to turn the tide. That Sasuke was gone now, the one with whom he could banter with and spar with and be Naruto with, not Hokage. But there was another Sasuke he could still save, one that he now had a chance of giving a better life to. Breathing finally steadying, Haruki lowered his hand, dropping it back into his lap as he glanced at the plastic clock he had bought yesterday. 5:10 a.m. stared back at him and the redhead could only sigh as he tossed back the blankets and got out of bed. 3 hours of sleep was actually pretty good in his book, so he wasn't complaining. He still wasn't used to sleeping in a bed and contemplated sleeping on the floor tonight. A quick shower and a cup of ramen later and Haruki was on his way out the door, whisker markings hidden behind a henge and his new weapons concealed on his body. He had gone on a shopping spree yesterday and had even managed to find a lightweight katana, one with an indigo hilt and a blade of tomahawk so strong that a hint shimmering blue flashed across the blade when wielded properly. The katana could channel elemental chakra, which was perfect for Haruki because most of his attacks with his old katana consisted of combining chakra with the sword. Haruki had bought it at Tenten's family store, and while he hadn't seen the future weapons mistress, he had shaken hands with her father. The man had recommended this katana after listening to Haruki's detailed description of his former blade. Locking his apartment door behind him and subtly activating the security seals on it, Haruki turned in the direction of the village's front gates, only to stop and blink in mild surprise when he caught sight of familiar blue eyes staring inquisitively back up at him. "Good morning," Haruki greeted his younger counterpart after a short, contemplative moment. While he was now living next door to the 12-year-old, he hadn't expected to have to interact with him until after he got back from Kumo. "I believe I'm your new neighbor, Kazama Haruki. Nice to meet you." This seemed to snap the boy out of whatever fascinated trance he had been in. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto." The blonde chirped brightly, but there was an undercurrent of uncertainty that Haruki easily detected, recognizing it from his own childhood whenever he had to force aside the fear of being rejected and hated so he could introduce himself. "You're living next to me now?" Haruki offered a faint half-smile to the genin. "Yes, I just got back from a long-term mission." Naruto frowned, eyes narrowing in suspicion. "So you had to get a new apartment?" "It was an 8-year-long mission," Haruki clarified, suppressing another smile at the odd expression that spread across the blonde's face. Had he really been this open when he was a child? "Having to keep up the rent on my old place would have been a waste of money, so I had to find a different place to live in now that I'm back." "You must be really good for the old man to give you such a long mission," Naruto exclaimed, eyes lighting up with excitement. "And you're living next to me." The blonde fell silent for a moment as he eyed Haruki's ninja garb. "Are you going on another mission already?" Haruki nodded, slipping his hands into the Junin vest he was currently wearing. An Anbu had dropped off both the vest and a brand new Hite 8 last night. "Yes, but it's a top-secret mission and I'll be back in 5 days, so don't tell anyone, okay?" If there was one thing Haruki knew his current self and his younger self would always share, it was the adamant refusal to break their word. When Naruto nodded seriously, Haruki knew the younger boy would take the information to his grave. With a satisfied nod, Haruki checked the sky, noting the rising sun before turning back to Naruto. "I still have some time before I have to leave. Have you had breakfast yet? We could go get some ramen or something." As expected, Naruto immediately brightened at the mention of ramen, but deflated again almost immediately. "I can't. I have to meet my new team at 6 for our test to become genin and our sensei told us not to eat anything." Haruki considered this thoughtfully. Really, looking back, Kakashi could have at least let them eat, especially when the man was going to be late. "Who is your sensei?" "Hitaki Kakashi." Naruto made a face. "He's kinda weird." Haruki found himself grinning a little at this. "Ah, I've heard of him. He's famous for being late to everything by at least 2 hours. You must have met him yesterday. Was he late?" Naruto's eyes widened as he nodded vigorously. "Yeah, he was over 3 hours late." Haruki's sweat dropped. He had forgotten how long it took for Kakashi to pick them up the first time around, but even for the copy nin, over 3 hours seemed a bit excessive. "Then I don't think you have anything to worry about. I guarantee he won't meet up with you and your team for at least a few hours. A little breakfast now wouldn't hurt either. You'll have digested it all by the time he arrives anyway." Still, Naruto hesitated, shifting indecisively from foot to foot. "But Sasuke Teme and Sakura-chan won't have anything to eat." Haruki smiled again in approval. "How about this then? We still have some time before 6 so we can swing by Ichiraku's, pick up some ramen, and then you can take some back to your teammates. My treat, since you're keeping a secret for me." The blonde's eyes lit up again, obviously pleased by this suggestion. Thanks, Kazama-san." Haruki quirked an eyebrow as they began their trek to the ramen stand. "Haruki is fine. Kazama-san makes me feel old. Although," he thought reflectively, "I feel old either way." "Haruki-san then," Naruto peered almost shyly up at him. "You're being really nice." The redhead suppressed the faint stirring of anger welling up inside him. While he knew the blonde was simply him as a child, it felt worse this time around seeing the loneliness in someone who, technically, was another person. His younger counterpart very much reminded him of Yusuke at the moment. And thinking of Yusuke, Haruki would have to find a way to adopt him again, but that would have to wait, no matter how much he disliked the idea. Leaving a 6-year-old alone in his apartment was hardly ideal. He would work on it when he came back. Can't I be nice to a new friend? Haruki smiled gently down at the boy, who ducked his head and flushed red with embarrassment but seemed equally pleased at the same time. The redhead decided at that very moment that this Naruto, who had already suffered 12 years as the Konoha's pariah, would never know that pain and loneliness again, not while he was here. When he came back from Kumo, if he noticed so much as a glare from any of the villagers, he or she would be getting a taste. Only a taste, as he didn't think Sarutobi would be very pleased with him if he did any real damage to any of them, no matter how much they would deserve it. As to why enemy nin had all been ordered to flee on sight if they ever laid eyes on him before he had even turned 18. By the time they had reached the ramen stand, Naruto had opened up and had gone through all the reasons for disliking Sasuke Teme. He's a jerk and an arrogant bastard and he has the personality of a rock. As well as all the reasons for liking Sakura-chan. She's pretty and cute and she has cool hair. Haruki only chuckled, absently surprised at the sound since he couldn't remember the last time he had openly shown amusement. Or shown amusement at all, for that matter. What would you like? Haruki eyed his wallet, wondering if he had promised, might treat, a bit too soon, but Naruto showed a commendable amount of restraint when he only listed 3 types of ramen. Could I have a miso ramen, a tonkatsu ramen for Sasuke, and a Toriniku ramen for Sakura-chan? Please? Haruki smiled and nodded, glancing up when Tucci, the old chef, stepped out of the back of the shop, already smiling a greeting at the short blonde. And oh, the man was a sight for sore eyes. Both Tucci and Ayame had died when Konoha had been burned to the ground, but up until the very last moment, both father and daughter had carried on working, determined to give the Konoha citizens some semblance of normalcy amidst the depression of war. Good morning, Naruto. You're up early. Naruto grinned brightly at the owner of the ramen stand. Morning, Tucci-san. I have training with my genin team this morning, but I came by to pick up breakfast first. Realization dawned on Tucci's face. That's right, you've been assigned to a genin team. Well, a young ninja can't go hungry. What would you like? While Naruto rattled off his orders, Haruki caught the older man's gaze as Tucci gave him an assessing look. He could recall that both Tucci and Ayame had been very protective of him, especially when he was younger, so the redhead figured he should probably put the man at ease. Kazama Haruki offered once Naruto finished talking. Naruto-kun's next-door neighbor. Tucci squinted at him. I haven't seen you around before. Naruto cut in before Haruki could reply. Haruki-san's been away for a long time. He just got back yesterday and he's treating me to ramen as a welcoming present? Naruto blinked almost owlishly as he seemed to realize that welcoming presents were usually given to the person moving in, and Haruki chuckled again, not noticing the way Tucci relaxed at the unexpectedly warm sound, nor the way Naruto stilled at it, a look of wonder lighting his eyes as if unable to believe that anyone could laugh like that in his presence. Yes, Haruki shrugged, taking out a few bills to cover the ramen fee. I just moved in and met Naruto-kun this morning. Since neither of us have had breakfast yet, I'll lie, and Haruki reflexively crossed his fingers behind his wallet. I thought we'd swing by for ramen. Please add another miso ramen to the order. Tucci smiled again, waving a careless hand in the air as he started on the ramen. Half price on everything today. Consider it a welcome home present from me, Haruki-san. Haruki blinked and then nodded his thanks, placing the correct amount of money on the counter before taking the seat next to Naruto to wait. Haruki-san? The redhead glanced down at his younger counterpart, raising an eyebrow in question. The blonde squirmed in his seat, seemingly torn between 2 decisions before finally blurting out, could you show me a jutsu? Haruki blinked at the request, taking in the puppy-like eagerness that was blatant on the blonde's face before nodding. As if he could refuse the blonde anything with a face like that. Besides, the boy reminded him far too much of his own genin team 8 years ago. Those 3 had learned how to play him for a sucker way too quickly, not that he had tried particularly hard to stop them. Staring out at the quiet town, Haruki considered his jutsus before raising his hands and going through the proper seals. Futon. Go Dankeitsu Hoshi no Mori. Wind release. 5-pointed star spear. The blue swirl of wind chakra rushed around the street outside the stand. A gentle breeze compared to the maelstrom of wind Haruki was used to whipping up. Lances formed in the air at 5 equal points, surrounding one area before shooting forward. With a flick of his wrist, Haruki quickly dispelled it. Even holding back, a sizable hole would have formed in the ground and he had no wish to do manual labor for the Sandame anytime soon. Turning back to Naruto, Haruki blinked at the awestruck expression on the blonde's face. That was so cool, Naruto gushed, nearly bouncing in his seat. You're really strong. Haruki found himself rubbing the back of his head in his habitual movement when embarrassed. It wasn't as if the jutsu had been any higher than AB rank, and Naruto would one day be able to do it as well seeing as he had been the one to create it. It wasn't even all that impressive, but he supposed, to a genin, it really was something to see. You'll be that strong one day too, Haruki answered firmly, and watched in satisfaction as Naruto beamed up at him, obviously hearing the sincerity in the redhead's voice. It wasn't as if he was lying either, and the blonde seemed to realize this as he sat a little taller. Your ramen, Tucci cut in, placing 4 steaming bowls in front of them. As Naruto quickly dug into his bowl, the ramen stand owner glanced at Haruki again, his gaze softer this time but also slightly puzzled. You seem somewhat familiar, the man finally voiced, and Haruki forced himself not to tense up. But I could swear I've never met you before. Haruki shrugged and said nothing, plucking a napkin from the counter and handing it to his younger counterpart as the blonde inhaled his ramen before picking up 2 more bowls and waiting for Naruto to finish. Tucci shook his head, offering a warm smile. Never mind, any friend of Naruto's is a friend of mine. Come back anytime, we're open the entire day. Haruki nodded silently, gaze sliding to Naruto as the boy finished up, shouted his thanks, and picked up the remaining bowl, Sasuke's, with careful hands as he slid off his seat and joined Haruki as he ducked out of the shop. Tucci waved them out with a smile, one which Naruto answered with a grin of his own before the two set out towards the bridge. Haruki barely remembered to let Naruto lead, as he wasn't supposed to know where they were going. Soon, black and pink caught their attention and Naruto quickly shouted out a greeting. Sasuke only cast the blonde a disinterested look before glancing at Haruki, black eyes assessing, and Haruki felt his heart twist painfully in his chest. He quickly turned his gaze to the last genin of Team 7, watching as she scowled in Naruto's direction but directed a curious look at him. Again, the wide green eyes sent a rush of memories through his mind, some good, some bad, and all of them painful. He finally settled for keeping his eyes on his blonde companion. Somehow, that hurt less. Hey Sakura-chan, Sasuke Teme. I brought you food, baka. Sakura immediately snapped, swatting at the blonde. You're late, and we're not supposed to eat. Naruto pouted and rubbed his head. But Kakashi-sensei's going to be late anyway and a small breakfast won't hurt. Besides, Haruki-san says it's okay. Haruki almost sweat dropped when 3 pairs of eyes turned on him. Technically, he hadn't said it was okay, per se, but he supposed he had implied it, which meant he now had to take responsibility for his words. With an inward sigh, Haruki nodded cautiously. Training with nothing in your stomach is dangerous for you. A small meal wouldn't hurt and your sensei will be late anyway. You'll have digested everything by the time he gets here. See? Naruto thrust the ramen bowl he had been holding in Sasuke's direction, taking the boy off guard and somehow managing to dump the bowl into the Uchiha's hands. Eat it, before it gets cold. Sasuke barely spared the blonde a glance before directing his cool gaze at Haruki. Who are you? He asked bluntly, his words falling just short of rude. Haruki, now more than used to Sasuke's personality, replied without being offended while Naruto scowled at the raven-haired boy. Kazama Haruki, Naruto-kun's next-door neighbor. I met up with him this morning and thought some breakfast would help keep your strength up today. Sasuke said nothing more but, after a moment of consideration and a quick scan of Haruki's Junin vest, dug into his breakfast, nodding curtly at both him and Naruto. Haruki turned his gaze on the pink-haired Kunoichi next and offered the Toriniku ramen for the girl. Sakura blushed, ducking her head shyly as she glanced at Sasuke before replying uncertainly, I'm on a diet. Haruki tilted his head contemplatively. He had forgotten that the Sakura at this age was much more, well, girl than Kunoichi. It won't hurt, he assured after a moment, searching for the right words to convince her. Sakura liked books and facts, so Haruki would use that. You need a well-rounded diet to get a good figure, and that includes carbohydrates. As a Kunoichi, you'll burn off anything you don't need when you train later. Not eating or only eating certain foods is bad for your body in the long run. Sakura's cheeks darkened as she glanced hesitantly at him. You sure? Haruki allowed a small smile to curve his lips as he extended the bowl again. I'm sure. Mere seconds later, Haruki had Sakura eating her breakfast as well, and he turned to the blonde still standing at his side, now eyeing his teammate's ramen enviously. The redhead smothered his amusement and extended his own bowl instead. I can pick up my own breakfast later, Naruto-kun. Growing boys need food. Naruto only hesitated for a brief moment before flashing a grateful smile up at him and accepting the bowl, digging in with little fanfare. Haruki nodded in satisfaction before glancing up at the sky. I should get going. Things to do. A bit of advice though. Do a bit of a warm-up after you finish eating. It'll help digestion. He directed another smile in Sakura's direction, who promptly blushed. And it'll loosen your muscles when you're running around later. And later, during your test, and even after that, try not to think too individually. You're a team now, and your teammates are what will make you strong. Haruki carefully kept his gaze focused on all three of them, not singling anyone out. Sasuke would get defensive otherwise. It's a testament to your own strength if you can see the strengths in other people and learn to work with them. Letting your teammates down because of pride or arrogance means you are just as weak as those who don't have enough physical strength. Weaker, because you have no excuse. All three nodded, even Sasuke, who seemed surprisingly at ease in Haruki's presence, reminding the redhead of his Sasuke, the one who had been happy with himself and content with the people around him. They looked somewhat puzzled at his last hint, and Sasuke frowned a little at the mention of pride being a weakness, but none of them questioned him further. Haruki hoped it would be enough to get the Uchiha thinking. He knew how the adult Sasuke thought, knew what buttons to push to encourage the part of Sasuke that would one day grow up to be a great man, but he could only start the ball rolling now and give a hand to the boy now and then. The rest would be up to the future Anbu general. Naruto paused from his eating, voicing a question that bordered on insecurity. I'll see you later? Haruki smiled at the blonde's tact as he nodded, reaching out absently to ruffle his younger counterpart's bright hair as he stared down into inquisitive blue eyes. Of course. Good luck on your test, duckling. Naruto blinked, obviously startled, though it was a toss-up as to who was more so, the blonde or Haruki. Duckling. The redhead found himself rubbing the back of his head again, repressing the embarrassment threatening to show on his face. Ah, you reminded me of my old genin team for a moment. Short and small and, well, my apologies. Naruto seemed to consider this for a moment, pouting most likely at the short and small part before flashing an almost pleased grin up at Haruki. It's okay, I don't mind. Haruki raised his eyebrows but said nothing more, nodding a farewell to the blonde before doing the same to the other two. Without another word, the redhead quickly hurried away. He had planned to start out earlier, but he hadn't taken lingering with the rest of Team 7 to give them health advice into account. No matter, 5 days was plenty to get to Kumo and back if he kept moving. Yo! All three soon-to-be genin members of Team 7 turned various expressions of murder on the silver-haired Junin in front of them. You're late, both Naruto and Sakura accused, while even Sasuke glared daggers at the masked nin. Kakashi just smiled at them. Sorry, I got lost on the road of life. Liar. Naruto and Sakura chimed again in unison, scowling fiercely at the Junin. Kakashi shrugged carelessly, eyes flickering briefly to the nearby trash can and noting the 3 bowls of ramen. Ma, ready for your test? Naruto pouted as he eyed the lunchbox in each of his teammates' hands. He wriggled from his position, struggling with the ropes holding him to the tree stump. His stomach suddenly growled, breaking the silence, and the blonde promptly scowled, ducking his head as both his teammates glanced at him. He jerked a little when a bento box appeared in his line of sight and, following the hand that held it, Naruto blinked in confusion as he found himself staring into Onyx. Sasuke only frowned a little, extending some tempura in the blonde's direction. Eat, Sasuke snapped gruffly. You got us breakfast earlier. I'm just paying you back. Naruto gaped before grinning widely and accepting the food. He almost choked on it when another bento was thrust into his face, a red-faced Sakura scowling at him. Just this once, the kunoichi snapped, offering one of the rice balls from her lunch. And it isn't as if you bought us breakfast, but like Haruki-san said, you'll be useless if you don't eat something. Naruto grinned again, features bright. Thanks Sakura-chan. Sasuke teme. Sasuke just rolled his eyes. Just hurry up Dobi, before sensei gets back. Naruto quickly swallowed the rice ball, smiling contentedly for a moment before his eyes widened, watching as a strong wind rolled in and the sky darkened. Kakashi appeared in a swirl of leaves, staring forebodingly at them as the ground shook. You three, he barked, looming over them. Sasuke, Sakura, I told you not to feed him. What have you got to say for yourselves? Sasuke only glared right back, chin tilted up defiantly as he unconsciously shifted to place Naruto further behind him. Beside him, Sakura had flushed and her eyes were wide with alarm, but her shoulders squared as if preparing for battle, and her gaze never wavered from the copy nin. Behind both of them, Naruto scowled at Kakashi, blue eyes narrowed. This was his team, damn it. They had gone to bat for him. He couldn't let them take the fall. We're a team. Naruto glared fiercely as their sensei's gaze turned on him. Don't just single them out. Besides, I'm the one who ate the food. Shut up Dobi. Sasuke tossed a dark look over his shoulder at the blonde. I offered when you were already hungry. It's not just your fault. Sakura scrambled closer to her two teammates, elbowing the tied-up genin roughly. Yeah, I chose to feed you too. Stop trying to act tough. It makes you look stupid. All three turned back to their sensei as Kakashi came even closer, visible eye unreadable. If that's how you three feel, then I have no choice but to pass judgment on you. You, pass. A stunned silence fell over the three genin as their surroundings returned to normal and Kakashi eyes smiled at them again, crouching down to their level. You three are the first team I've ever passed, he told them cheerfully. You stuck up for one another instead of just listening to me. His eye turned somber, studying them with careful consideration. The purpose of the bells was to try and turn you against one another. To see if you would put yourselves above the team. And it worked for a time, which is to be expected, but in what you just did you showed me the beginnings of teamwork. The beginnings of caring about the team's strength, not just your own. You have to remember. In the world of ninjas, those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. All three genin were quiet for a moment, taking this in as Haruki's last piece of advice came back to them. They glanced at each other. How had the redhead known? Well, Kakashi continued in a lighter tone, rising and stuffing his hands into his pockets. Team 7 will start missions tomorrow. Meet at the bridge at 6. With a poof, the copy nin disappeared and, unbeknownst to the newly formed Team 7, reappeared in a tree nearby, observing them with a steady eye. Below, Sasuke rose to his feet, dusting himself off as Sakura quickly packed up the lunches and placed them by the stump. Kakashi would probably come back for them later. Both of them turned to stare at the blonde of their team before Sasuke finally heaved a sigh and took out a kunai, cutting the ropes with quick efficiency. Oi Dobi, Sasuke voiced, idly twirling his kunai as Naruto landed on his feet and stretched out his limbs. Who is your neighbor? How did he know Kakashi-sensei's test would be based on teamwork? Naruto shrugged sheepishly as even Sakura focused on him with curious attentiveness. I dunno. He just moved in next to me. He just returned from an 8-year-long mission and needed a new place to live. And he knew Kakashi-sensei was going to be late, which was why he offered to buy us breakfast. Just like that? Sakura questioned, looking puzzled. I mean, he doesn't really know us, does he? And he's a Junin. Why would he bother with a bunch of genin? Naruto shrugged again, one hand reaching up to rub the back of his head. I don't know Teme, but… Dobi, stop. Sasuke suddenly ordered, and Naruto instinctively froze as even Sakura was blinking at him with a startled expression on her face. Sasuke studied the smaller boy with careful consideration before murmuring, he did the exact same thing. Did what? Naruto glanced nervously between his two teammates. Can I put my arm down now? Sakura quickly nodded but didn't look away as Naruto dropped his arm back to his side. Naruto, she said in a hushed voice. Are you sure you don't know him? Haruki-san rubbed his head like that too. Naruto tilted his head in confusion. Lots of people do that, don't they? I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only one. Sasuke and Sakura actually exchanged a look before turning back to the blonde. Yeah, Sasuke agreed carefully. But the way he does it just gives off the same. He trailed off, eyes flickering away as he seemed to realize he was taking far too much interest in something unrelated to his training. Sakura quickly picked up the train of thought from her crush though. It gives off the same feel, she tried to explain. I mean, when Haruki-san did it earlier, the action seemed really familiar to me, but I didn't make the connection until I saw you do it now. You always rub your head like that. Naruto frowned but dropped any suspicions easily enough. Well, I've never met him before, but I think he's nice. And I don't think he was faking any of it either. And he's super strong too. I got him to show me a jutsu when we were getting ramen and he made the wind do super cool stuff. So I think it's good to take his advice. I mean, even Sasuke Teme listened to him without pretending not to. Sasuke twitched before tucking his kunai away and turning in the direction of his home. Whatever. I'm leaving. Do us all a favor, Dobi, and don't get tied to any more tree stumps. And just like that, everything went back to normal as Sakura rushed after the raven-haired genin asking for a date with a rising blush in her face, and Naruto scowled after them and went on his own way, deciding to head to Iruka's apartment first to tell the man the good news. Still hidden in the shadows of the nearby tree, Kakashi ran an absent hand through his hair. Interesting, someone in Konoha knew of his tardiness and, more importantly, his tests, someone who had been away from Konoha for the past 8 years and with a wind affinity no less. Last time he checked, he hadn't been a sensei 8 years ago. He paused to consider this. Surely the Sandame would be willing to tell him something about this Haruki. He checked the sun's position and, deeming himself a sufficient 3 hours late for reporting back to the Hokage, disappeared in a puff of smoke. Late, Kakashi. I don't even know why I bother anymore. Kakashi eyes smiled at the Hokage before whipping out his newest Icha Icha Paradise book. Around him, several of the other Junin twitched and Kurenai looked ready to deck him. The Hokage just sighed and waved a dismissive hand in the air. Alright, now that we're finally all here, tell me whether you passed your teams or not. Team 1, pass. Team 2, pass. Team 3, fail. Team 4, pass. Team 5, fail. Team 6, fail. Team 7, pass. Silence. Dead silence met this announcement as all the present Jonin turned to stare dubiously at the copy nin. Kakashi glanced up from his book, eye scanning the room lazily, and a faint smirk became visible behind his mask. The Hokage only shook his head, a small smile curving his lips as he marked the answer down. He hadn't expected anything less, seeing as Haruki had given no indication that his younger counterpart would fail. But it was still shocking for Kakashi to actually pass a team. Team 8, pass. Team 9, fail. And Team 10, pass. Sarutobi nodded his approval. The new batch of genin seemed to show promise. Very well, missions for your genin teams will start tomorrow. Dismissed. The Jonin piled out of the office, some shooting curious glances at Kakashi as the copy nin made no move to leave. Kakashi, Sarutobi started, some idea of what the man wanted already forming in his mind. Can I help you with something? Kakashi straightened, tucking his book away as he made sure the office door was shut before turning to the Hokage. Hiya Hokage-sama, I came across something interesting today. Oh? Yes, a man named Haruki. I only got his first name. My students were talking about him. A Junin apparently with a wind affinity recently returning from an 8-year-long mission who knows how my tests work, and last I checked, Asuma was the only Jonin outside of Anbu with a wind affinity in Konoha. Sarutobi forced down the urge to show his amusement, carefully keeping his face neutral as he studied the curiosity flashing in Kakashi's visible eye. You must mean Kazama Haruki. Sarutobi offered, watching the faint frown pass over the Jonin's brow. He just returned yesterday from an infiltration mission. He's good at what he does. Getting information on you wouldn't be too hard for him. Though I have not had the time to properly assess how his abilities have changed in his absence, it is not uncommon for Jonin to be proficient in elements outside their affinity. In fact, it's a requirement, as you know. Kakashi nodded slowly but added bluntly, I've never heard of him. Sarutobi shrugged nonchalantly. You were Anbu 8 years ago, Kakashi. And I didn't exactly announce his mission to the village. He's a quiet man. You might have missed him." Kakashi nodded again. "Do you know where he is now?" "Around," Sarutobi voiced vaguely. "I've given him some vacation time. He deserves it." "Planning to interrogate him yourself?" Kakashi had the decency to look sheepish. "Just curious, Hokage-sama. My kids seem quite taken with him. Besides, if he's a fellow Junin, I'd like to get to know him." What does he look like?" Sarutobi chuckled. "Look for red hair. You can't miss him. Once he returns, of course." He added mentally. Kakashi nodded his thanks, sketching a quick salute before disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Sarutobi stared disapprovingly at the pile of foliage now in his office. Really, couldn't they just use the door? It was there for a reason. A figure slipped unseen over the wall surrounding the shrine, passing by the lax guards placed at the entrance. Red hair tucked neatly away, the black-clad nin quickly sped into the interior of the shrine, pausing only long enough to deactivate the simple seals placed around the small building housing the body of Hyuga Hizashi. For someone as hated as the Hyuga clan head's brother, the man really did get quite a resting place. Haruki supposed this had more to do with the fact that they simply wanted to flaunt the fact that they had Hizashi's body while ignoring the fact that they had failed to get their hands on Hyuga Hiyashi. Either way, while the shrine was simple enough, the place was also built quite elegantly, trees planted on either side of the shrine with statues lined up on either side of the path. The red paint coloring the roof was well maintained as well, and the grass surrounding the shrine was well kept. No torches were lit inside the shrine, which made Haruki's work that much easier. Reaching the dust-covered coffin in which Hizashi had been laid out, Haruki noted the somewhat complex seal on the lid. He frowned. This was not the seal he had come across in his former life. That seal had just been placed on the coffin for keeping the corpse from decomposing. A simple enough seal. This one. Haruki leaned in closer, studying the symbols that made up the seal. When he had retrieved Hizashi's body with Neji in the other timeline, he had been 19, 7 years from now in this current timeline. Why would the seal on a dead body be different between the two times? His eyes suddenly focused on the center of the seal, a swirl of symbols that defined suspended life. Suspended life? The only reason that would be here. With a mental curse, Haruki silently pulled out a piece of paper, ink, and a brush. He really hoped this wasn't what he thought it was. He had worked with life suspension seals before, having come across them when going through Sasori's heart container. He knew how to counter it. A few minutes later, he slapped the counter seal on top of the coffin. A brief flash of chakra lit the coffin lid before the ink on both seals disappeared. Quietly, Haruki lifted the lid of the coffin, putting it aside carefully before taking a deep breath and looking inside. He stared. It was official. Someone up there seriously hated him. Impassively, he watched the gentle rise and fall of Hyuga Hizashi's chest as his mind raced at this new turn of events. The man had clearly been dead when he and Neji had gone to fetch the body. Clearly. Which meant Kumo or someone else had killed the man sometime before Haruki had turned 19. He leaned closer and noted the familiar thin scar marring the man's throat, a calculated cut for murdering prisoners. Obviously, they had planned on killing him. Someone had figured out what the Hyuga's curse seal would do once the man was dead. Someone else had then managed to save him, and then had Hizashi preserved until they could figure out how to break the curse seal. Naruto scoffed. He had figured that out by the time he had turned 16. Apparently, one had a lot of free time on their hands when infiltrating enemy countries. He had spent an entire year in Iwa and had managed to figure out both the caged bird seal and Orochimaru's curse seal. Not bad for a 15-year-old. But right now, none of those thoughts helped. On one hand, if he didn't take Hyuga Hizashi's body back, he would have a guilty conscience for not getting the poor man out while he was still alive. The Hyuga clan would be up in arms if they ever found out. Neji would probably want his head on a silver platter if the same thing happened, and he would have no proof of his spying in Kumo for the council. And it was one hell of a but, nothing unexpected would happen in this timeline if he stuck to his plan and retrieved a dead Hyuga Hizashi and not a live one. On the other hand, if he did take Hyuga Hizashi's body back, he would be guilt-free, and Kami knew how much guilt he already had on his shoulders. He didn't need any more. The Hyuga clan would be indebted to him for forever and a day. Neji would have his father back, and he would have sufficient proof for the council. And there was a shitload of buts this time. The Hyuga clan would never keep quiet about something like this. He had no idea how the Sandaime wanted to play this. Konohagakure would probably regain an age-old enemy out of Kumo before the week was out. Another war would start. His purpose for coming back would become null and void. And the timeline would be completely fucked up. It would be unbelievable what the difference between a dead man and a live one could make if it wasn't currently staring him in the face. Literally. Kami, he wasn't even being paid for this. Haruki grimaced, closing his eyes briefly and pinching the bridge of his nose as he debated on his next action. Given his two choices, the logical one would be the first. There was a whole lot less that could go wrong. His mind said option 1. Too bad his heart said option 2. He breathed deeply, staring down at the comatose Hyuga again. Neji had once told him a little about his father during one of the rare lulls in the war, when it had just been the two of them holed up in one of the shabby tents set up on the battlefield. Neji had told him how his father had been quite bitter with the main house because of the caged bird seal. But he had later learned from Hiyashi that, while he had been angry about this, his father had also taken Hiyashi's place during the Hyuga affair of his own free will, having forcefully stopped Hiyashi from refusing his decision. To Naruto, Hyuga Hizashi seemed like a good man, and Naruto knew all about how angry one could get over having a seal put on oneself without consent. Haruki sighed and straightened, quickly drawing up another life suspension seal and unsealing the body clone he had brought along to replace Hizashi. In the end, he was just stalling for time. He had known, from the moment he had realized that the man was still alive, that he would not be leaving without his future second-in-command's father. Besides, he doubted the Kumo shinobi came regularly to check up on someone the rest of the world thought was dead. With a little chakra manipulation, the body clone was now an exact replica of Hyuga Hizashi, down to the scar running across his throat, with the exception of the no-breathing part. Gently, Haruki lifted Hizashi from the coffin with minimal difficulty, making sure the simple kimono he was wearing didn't catch on anything and carefully placing the man on the ground against a nearby pillar. While the seal had kept the man alive without food or water, seals like that also didn't work forever and the seal's recipient's health would decline over time. Hizashi was already too thin. From there, the redhead quickly replaced Hizashi with the body clone, shutting the coffin again and activating the new life suspension seal. The body inside the coffin would still be unanimated since it had never been alive in the first place, but the seal would look like it was working at the very least. Clearing up any evidence of his presence from the shrine and brushing away the few fingerprints he had imprinted on the coffin, Haruki scanned the room one last time before scooping up the Hyuga clan head's brother and slipping out of the shrine. Again, leaving the shrine was just as easy as getting in, even with an extra burden. Stopping once he reached the mountain pass that would eventually lead him back to Konoha, Haruki paused to consider his options. He couldn't seal the man into a scroll and he really didn't want to use his space-time ninjutsu with a physically fragile man in tow. Haruki scowled. This seriously put a wrench in his plans. He had been planning on flashing back to the Konoha gates to cut down travel time, getting him back to the village in the promised 5 days, but now, with a little over a day to get back. "Kurama, you awake?" Silence, and then a low grumbling growl reverberated in his mind as the fox yawned. "What do you want, kid?" "I need a lift back to Konoha. Got an unexpected passenger." Haruki felt the Kyuubi stir in his mindscape. "Isn't that human supposed to be dead?" The redhead sighed gloomily. "I feel like an ass for thinking this, but things would be so much simpler if he was." The demon fox snorted and then a bright flash of red glowed briefly beside Haruki and a horse-sized Kurama appeared beside him, stretching languidly as he waved his 9 tails behind him. "Hop on, Kit." The Kyuubi turned one intelligent purple eye on Haruki. "I'll get you home on time." Naruto smiled gratefully before clambering on, settling Hizashi in front of him to make sure the man didn't fall off along the way. Riding Kurama was a lot like flying during a storm after all. Kakashi found himself with a slight tick over one eye when his genin team managed to find Tora in record-breaking time. Again, and the record they had broken was their own. From 3 days ago. He had no idea what had happened to his team. What had happened to the fangirl and the Avenger and the dead last. Ever since the genin test, the three seemed to have clicked and Kakashi couldn't be happier that his students were now working well together, better than he could have ever hoped for. But changes like the ones he had observed didn't happen without a reason. While Naruto and Sasuke still argued and Sakura was still violent-prone towards the hyperactive blonde, all three seemed content enough to put aside their differences, or at least work with their differences enough to complete all the D-rank missions Kakashi had thrown at them. Whatever the mysterious Haruki had told them before he had arrived the day of the Genin test seemed to have stuck with them, and even Sasuke, the so-called Avenger and loner of the group, seemed to have put serious consideration in what they had heard. But it wasn't even the fact that some other Junin had managed to inspire them to work together and not Kakashi that irked the copy nin so much, it was the fact that he couldn't find the man. He was an ex-Anbu captain for Kami's sake. How hard could it be to find one red-haired Junin in his own village? And worst of all, he had even gone back to the Sandaime to ask for the redhead's whereabouts, only to be told that what Haruki did in his own time was his business and Sarutobi was not going to drag the man back to work just because Kakashi was dying of equal parts curiosity and paranoia. For the rest of his life, Kakashi would swear blind that his Hokage had been silently laughing at him the entire time. With a hidden grimace as Naruto bounced up to him, Tora in his somewhat scratched hands and Sakura and Sasuke coming up behind him, Kakashi sighed and nodded. "Alright, good job, Naruto, let Sakura and Sasuke take the cat back to the daimyo's wife." Before any of them could ask why, the copy nin quickly doled out a half-lie, "You returned the cat last time. I want Sakura and Sasuke to do it this time. Make sure to be polite, no matter what happens, understand?" Sakura nodded quickly enough, happy to spend more time with Sasuke, and took Tora from Naruto. But Sasuke shot him a searching look before glancing at Naruto, eyes speculative even as he turned away. That was another difference. Whatever Haruki had said, Sasuke now seemed to study his two teammates more seriously, and, on several occasions, had already made use of Naruto's cage bunchins. The Uchiha had half-suggested, half-ordered Naruto to send his bunchins to scope out the terrain when Kakashi had set up an obstacle course for them, and then had Naruto disperse them and relate back to the team what traps the copy nin had managed to set up, and had also gotten Sakura, with her knowledge of theory and facts, to teach Naruto whenever the blonde couldn't quite understand something Kakashi was teaching them. Sometimes, even Sasuke would listen in, his face carefully blank and turned away but a telltale glint of concentration in his eyes nonetheless. The Uchiha prodigy was cataloging his team's strengths and weaknesses and utilizing them accordingly. Kakashi knew Chunin and even Junin who couldn't do what Sasuke was learning to do. And it wasn't just Sasuke either. Sakura and Naruto had also changed a little. Sakura, though still obviously crushing on Sasuke, seemed better able to concentrate now that the Uchiha was not completely ignoring the pink-haired Kunoichi. She was now eating more too, even though the file Kakashi had received from the Hokage had mentioned that the girl was on a diet that leaned towards unhealthy. In addition to that, the regular, civil interactions she had with Naruto when Sasuke asked her to explain something to the blonde seemed to gain her some toleration towards Naruto as well. Naruto on the other hand was still just as cheerful, but the confidence that had seemed somewhat forced when Kakashi had first met him on the roof now appeared more genuine. It showed in the way the blonde walked through the streets as the civilians threw him dirty looks and whispered behind his back. Sakura and Sasuke had both picked up on this and would always make sure that the blonde walked between them, though Kakashi wasn't sure if this was done unconsciously or not. In turn, Naruto held his head a little higher, and his grins were a little more real, the sunny smiles sometimes causing a slight pain in his chest for reasons he wasn't sure of, though that was slowly fading and being replaced by fondness for his bright-haired student. Naruto was also surprisingly gracious when he couldn't do something that his teammates could, as he had seen during the few obstacle courses he had set up one day. Even Sasuke would try something himself and only turned to Naruto or Sakura when he had frustrated himself in trying to do something he obviously couldn't without help. Naruto instinctively trusted his teammates to take care of themselves in the areas they were good at and back them up when they couldn't. Kakashi could actually see the beginnings of what could be an amazing team a decade from now. They were still rough around the edges though, still mere children, and far from skilled enough to pull off any real missions outside of the village no matter how well they worked together, not to mention that they still fought a little too much, though Kakashi couldn't actually see that ever going away. But he could see it. If he squinted and looked hard enough, maybe turned his head a little to the left and tilted it at just the right angle under the mid-afternoon sun, he could make out what they could eventually become. While Sakura was the voice of reason on Naruto's left and Sasuke the shadow guard on the blonde Jinchuriki's right, Naruto would be their center, bright and shining, and suddenly, in the rare fascinating times Kakashi could see all this, Naruto's dream of becoming Hokage didn't seem all that impossible anymore. Of course, then Naruto would do something stupid. Sakura would slap him upside the head, and Sasuke would roll his eyes and heave a put-upon sigh at having been stuck on Team 7, and then Kakashi would blink and wonder if he had gone temporarily insane. But all these changes, in less than a week. Kakashi's curiosity had kept his genin team out for training for more than the allotted half a day, but none of them seemed to really mind, and Kakashi had managed to learn more about his team this way. It was seriously throwing a wrench in his lifestyle. He wasn't even late by more than an hour anymore, sometimes even less, and, while he usually had his book out in front of him, more often than not, he was observing his team instead. Which brought him back to the fact that he still couldn't find the man responsible. Kakashi had even dropped by Naruto's apartment building at odd times, though only in passing, since waiting for the man outside his apartment was borderline creepy, even for him, and the copy nin had drawn the line at outright stalking. But since the Sandame wasn't inclined to help him and his fellow Junins were worse than useless since none of them seemed to know Kazama Haruki, Kakashi was now stooping down to drill his blonde student. Surely Naruto, who lived next to the man, could give him a hand. In some part of his mind that Kakashi was adept at ignoring since he had more than his fair share of odd quirks, a voice was cheerfully informing him that his so-called curiosity was quickly becoming an unhealthy obsession and that perhaps he should head over to the hospital for a mental checkup. Like everything else that voice told him, Kakashi ignored it. Naruto, Kakashi started casually. Do you know where Kazama-san is? He wasn't sure how old the red-haired Junin was, but Sarutobi talked about Haruki the same way he talked to Kakashi, so the copy nin assumed they were at least around the same age. Somewhere around, I guess. Haruki-san is kinda quiet, so he probably likes spending some time alone. Blue eyes blinked innocently up at him throughout the blonde's answer. Kakashi was instantly suspicious. For one, he had seen the Hokage himself fold like wet paper when Naruto batted those eyes at him, and for another, Naruto had said almost the exact same thing the Hokage had told him on more than one occasion. Really, Kakashi crossed his arms. He supposed it wasn't really fair to seem intimidating, but it wasn't as if it actually worked. All three of his genins seemed immune to his posturing after that first day. But Naruto only grinned up at him, an excited gleam entering his eyes as he almost bounced on the spot. Really? You can even stop by our apartment building tonight. You'll probably see him then. I can introduce you. Kakashi blinked. This was not what he had been expecting. Naruto was actually giving him a time when the redhead would actually be present. Maybe he should have asked the blonde earlier? Well, okay then. Kakashi quickly smiled at his student and whipped out his book to hide his sudden confusion. He was sure he was missing something here. I'll swing by at around 8, okay? Naruto nodded before waving goodbye and bouncing off in the direction of his favorite ramen stand. Kakashi sighed and almost slapped himself with his book. Seriously, he felt like he was completely out of the loop here. But he wanted to meet this Kazama Haruki. He wanted to know what kind of man could influence a bunch of kids so much with only a few choice words. Thanks for the lift, Kurama. I can take it from here. The demon fox nodded distractedly, eyeing the village they could just see beyond a thick crop of trees. I don't see it, the Kyuubi finally decided. I have no idea what you see in that village. Humans. Emotional lot, all of you. And with that said, the fox disappeared with a swish of his tails, reappearing in Haruki's mindscape and promptly settling down for another nap. Haruki huffed in amusement but paid the fox no mind. A demon just didn't see things the same way humans did. Adjusting his grip on Hyuga Hizashi, Haruki quickly summoned a small yellow fox without using seals. Go to Sarutobi-sama, he ordered. Tell him that I've finished, but some complications have risen and I need a private audience. Tell him to use the seal once his office is cleared. The fox dipped her head in acknowledgement before loping off in the direction of the village. Mere minutes later, Haruki felt a faint tug in his mind and he stepped without hesitation to the Sandame's location, tightening his hold on Hizashi. A shorter distance was better when he traveled with an unconscious person in tow. Appearing in the office, Haruki looked up to find a frozen Sarutobi staring at the man Haruki was carrying with deceiving placidity. Several seconds ticked by and the redhead waited patiently for the Sandame to pull himself together. "Oh dear," Sarutobi finally managed faintly. Haruki snorted, glancing around and walking over to the couch in the side office to put Hisashi down. "Yeah, understatement, old man." Sarutobi sighed, walking over to stand beside him. "This really is Hyuga Hisashi?" "Yup." Haruki pulled off the bandana that had kept his hair out of sight. "Startled the hell out of me too. In my time, Neji and I went to get him and he was very much dead, but I was 19 at the time. The seal from that time was different too. It was just a body stasis seal. The seal I came across yesterday was a life suspension seal. And you managed to break it?" A note of amazement rang in the older Hokage's voice. Haruki smirked just a little, a thrum of pride warming his heart. "I'm a Fuinjutsu master, old man. I'm better than Raya." Sarutobi smiled warmly up at him. Noticeable pride glowing on the old man's features, and Haruki found himself smiling back just a little. This man's opinion had always been important to him, even after he had died. "So what should we do now?" Haruki cleared his throat a little, stepping away. He wasn't too used to private emotional moments, and too much time actually part of one made him uncomfortable. Sarutobi heed thoughtfully, tactfully ignoring the slightly embarrassed shift in Haruki's expression. "Well, the Hyuga clan will have to be notified. You replaced Hisashi-san with the clone?" Haruki inclined his head, arms crossed in front of him. "I did, and I replaced the life suspension seal as well. So long as no one opens the coffin and examines it too closely, the switch should go by unnoticed. At least until one of those Kumo nins get it into their heads that they might know how to get rid of the caged bird seal without killing the man and the rakage lets them." Sarutobi shot him a speculative glance. "Do you?" Haruki smiled thinly. "I can get rid of any seal, old man." The Sandame's eyes widened. "Even Orochimaru's curse seal?" Haruki's face darkened. "Especially Orochimaru's curse seal. That foul excuse of chakra needs eliminated at every turn." Sarutobi stared for a moment longer before shaking his head fondly. "You've grown up well, Haruki-kun." Haruki shrugged. "Circumstances, old man. Circumstances and necessity." The Hokage only nodded this time, filing away all the information he could, understanding without asking. "Well, we won't be able to keep this a secret for very long. Kumo only asked for Hiyashi-san's body though, and then eventually settled for Hisashi-san's body. There were no terms for a prisoner. We could use that to our advantage." "War, old man," Haruki reminded, running a hand over tired eyes. "We don't want war." Sarutobi nodded in agreement, eyes briefly showing concern at the desolation in the redhead's voice. "Of course not. We would need some legitimate way to place Hisashi-san back in Konoha without alerting them to the fact that Konoha managed to send someone into Kumo for his body." Haruki absently unsealed his Junin vest from a scroll and tugged it on, eyes distant as his mind recalled all those strategy sessions he and Shikamaru had sat through, suggesting tactic after tactic, building on them, perfecting them. An idea formed in his mind, and Haruki looked back at Sarutobi, who, to his credit, had stayed patiently silent as Haruki took a trip down memory lane. "Ah," Haruki rubbed the back of his head. "Sorry, I have an idea. What if we say that the life suspension seal had been weakened with time? The coffin was covered in dust, so it's obvious no one's poked around there for a while. We could say that Hisashi-san managed to escape because the seal's hold on him slipped enough for him to get out. I could go back to Kumo and blow the shrine sky high. I'll leave some evidence of a faded life suspension seal lying in the wreckage before making my way back to Konoha. We could say Hisashi-san blew up the place. I mean, a disoriented man waking up inside a box is hardly ideal for anyone. He would try to get himself out and he could claim temporary selective memory loss. The mountains in Kaminari no Kuni are distinctive, and he would have realized where he was and, not remembering much of anything, immediately set out for home. That could place him in Konoha without us ever having to lift a finger. Konoha finds out, the shit hits the fan, and Kumo has no room for deniability this time around. You said so yourself. A prisoner was not the deal we made with Kumo. We get Hisashi-san back, Kumo can't declare war on us, and we'll have total control of the entire situation. This will also solve the problem between me and the council. In my time, it took a while to find out where Hizashi-san's body was hidden. 8 years in Kumo is sufficient time to find out, and long enough for a less than average seal's power to decline enough for someone to break through. Dead silence met him as Haruki finished, and the redhead blinked at the almost slack expression on Sarutobi's face. The man looked slightly dumbfounded and seemed to be trying to find the right words. Luckily, another voice cut in before Haruki started worrying about shock. I agree with this plan. The voice came from the couch and both of them started, snapping their heads to stare into distinctive Byakugan eyes. Hizashi's voice had been gravelly with misuse, but still steady as he gazed straight at Haruki. Haruki froze, immediately wondering how long the man had been awake. He had been stupid. All ninjas were trained to be able to go from unconscious to conscious without any visible signs. He should have made sure. Haruki-san, was it? Haruki tensed under the Hyuga's contemplative gaze. How long have you been awake? He asked stiffly. Hizashi slowly shifted into a sitting position. Long enough to gather that you seem to be at least acquaintances with a version of my son old enough to infiltrate Kumogakure. An uncomfortable silence settled over the three of them, and Haruki idly wondered if he could whack the Hyuga over the head hard enough to actually give him memory loss. Then again, he doubted the Hokage would be very happy about it. I will not pursue this issue any further, Hizashi suddenly interrupted his thoughts. Nor will I repeat anything I have heard today to anyone else. It is the very least I can do for the man who seems to have saved my life. Haruki blinked at this unexpected turn, studying Hizashi's face for any sign of deceit before glancing at Sarutobi. The Sandame was smiling faintly. It seemed neither of them believed the Hyuga to be lying. Haruki grunted and shrugged, backing away into the comfort of the shadows before moving into the side kitchen and out of sight of the other two occupants of the office. He had gotten used to staying hidden whenever he could back during the war. The habit would probably never leave him. Well then, moving on, Sarutobi finally spoke, ignoring the slight tension in the air mostly caused by the redhead. Hizashi-san, how do you feel? Hizashi shifted a little, testing his limbs as he clenched and unclenched his hands. Stiff, but that will go away soon enough. May I trouble you for a cup of water, Hokage-sama? Sarutobi immediately nodded, but Haruki was already moving back into the room, a cup of water in one hand. Wordlessly, he handed it to the Hyuga before backing away, glancing back into the kitchen as Sarutobi and Hizashi realized that they could hear water beginning to boil. Hizashi nodded slowly in thanks, studying the redhead half hidden in shadows with puzzled curiosity. The man didn't give off an unapproachable aura, and when he had woken up halfway back to Konoha on the Flying Fox, Haruki's hold on him had been careful and protective. Now the man just seemed uneasy, as if he wasn't sure what to do with Hizashi now that Hizashi knew. And yes, he knew. He had picked up enough to realize this was the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, and last time he had checked, Uzumaki Naruto had been the vessel, and should only be, by all means, 8 years older than the last time he had glimpsed the boy. He suspected that the red hair was a henge, though he couldn't detect anything. Hizashi had also figured out that this man was most likely from the future, or at least a parallel universe, not that he was an expert on the subject. And the casual way he had mentioned his son's name, even in passing, held a certain quality of warm affection, and Hizashi had no doubt that the two had been friends. He could tell that this man was powerful too. A Fuinjutsu master, and an excellent strategist if the plan the man had spun on the spot was anything to go by. Studying the redhead carefully, Hizashi frowned at the exhaustion he could see in the tense line of the man's shoulders, a fatigue that he doubted was from his so-called mission to Kumo. Eyes far too old for such a young man confirmed that. And the way Haruki had mentioned war earlier, the deep disgust and grieving sorrow mixed together to form the word could only have come from a war veteran far too used to blood and death. But he had also felt the innate kindness in the redhead when the man had carried him home, had seen the absolute trust the Sandame had in Haruki, and the instinctive attentiveness Haruki possessed when he had guessed what Hizashi had wanted before he had even asked for it. The kettle suddenly sounded and the redhead was already moving, a flash of crimson fire amongst the shadows. The kettle cut off and the sound of cupboards opening and closing reached their ears. A minute later, Haruki was back, ramen in one hand and a fork in the other. Hizashi's eyebrows rose. The redhead had even caught the fact that there was no way his fingers would have enough dexterity to use chopsticks at the moment. Thank you, Hizashi spoke aloud this time, hoping to allay some of the worried anxiety flashing in the man's blue gaze by showing his own sincere gratitude. The redhead studied him for a moment, blue eyes piercing before the intensity disappeared and a softer look replaced the earlier tension in Haruki's features. You're welcome. The redhead huffed a little, the slightest hint of embarrassment showing on his face, and Hizashi caught a glimpse of the blonde boy this man had grown up from. Sarutobi, watching this exchange, tried not to let his amusement show. Really, first Kakashi, and now Hizashi. Haruki was reeling people in without even being aware of it. Alright, back to the plan. Sarutobi drew their attention back to him as he turned to Haruki. It's an excellent plan. There are a few parts that will have to be smoothed out, but overall, since Hizashi-san has agreed, we can work with it. Haruki nodded once in acknowledgement and Sarutobi turned back to Hizashi. For now, Hizashi-san will have to stay here. No one comes into my private office and the seals on the doors hide any chakra signals anybody give off once I activate them. Is that alright? Hizashi nodded as well and Sarutobi turned once more to Haruki. Good work, Haruki-kun. Go home and get some rest. I'll have one of my Anbu go get you when the council convenes. You'll want to be present? Yes, Haruki ran a hand through his hair, adjusting his Junin vest as he got ready to leave. There is also another matter I want to speak to you about, but it can wait until tomorrow, much as I don't like the idea. Right now, I suppose you'll want to move fast. Indeed, Sarutobi agreed, already grinning. And Haruki-kun? You might want to prepare yourself for a visit from Kakashi very soon. He's been running all over the village looking for you since you left 5 days ago. Haruki eyed the Hokage dubiously. Kakashi? Why? Sarutobi shrugged. You seem to have made quite an impact on his genin team. He wants to meet you, but it's been quite entertaining watching him looking for someone who hasn't even been here the entire time. I haven't seen him work so hard in a long time. Haruki snorted, rolling his eyes. Great. Not only is he a pervert, Kakashi's turned into a stalker. Just my luck. With one last shake of his head, the redhead nodded at Hizashi, who had managed to stand, if somewhat unsteadily, and had sketched a respectful bow, the slightest of smiles on his face when he straightened up again. Thank you again, Haruki-san. Haruki flashed him the briefest of smiles, something on his face relaxing before he turned to Sarutobi again and sketched his own salute. With a wave, the redhead disappeared and the remaining occupants could just catch the sound of Haruki's foot pushing off from the windowsill of the outer office. He's an interesting man, Hizashi commented after a short pause, sitting down again and picking up his ramen. Yes, Sarutobi agreed genially. He has been great once, and there is no doubt in my mind that he will be great again, whether or not he wishes to be so. Welcome home, Haruki-san. Blinking tiredly, Haruki turned once he reached the top of the stairs of his apartment complex to see a familiar blonde bound up to him, blue eyes wide, a bright smile already splitting his features. Only the faintest traces of uncertainty lurked just under the surface of that expression, and that too quickly dissipated when Haruki openly smiled down at the boy. Hello duckling, I didn't expect to see you so soon. Did you pass your genin test? Naruto beamed up at him. Yup. Kakashi-sensei wanted us to learn teamwork, but we didn't know that at first and we all tried to attack him to get the bells, cuz that's what we had to do to pass the test before lunch, but none of us could, and then I was tied to a tree stump. Haruki reached out and ruffled the boy's hair as Naruto broke off for air. Breathe, Naruto-kun. What happened next? Naruto grinned sheepishly up at him but quickly launched back into the story. So I was tied to the tree stump as punishment while Sasuke and Sakura-chan got to eat the lunches. Sensei told them they couldn't feed me and then he left, but he came back and passed us when Sasuke and Sakura-chan gave me some of their lunches. The blonde frowned a little and peered curiously up at the redhead. He told us that those who break the rules are scum, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than scum. He passed us because the three of us stuck up for each other. How did you know he would? Haruki's smile faded, absently withdrawing his hand. Perhaps he had revealed a little too much that day. I didn't really, he spoke carefully. But teams can't work well together without teamwork. Most sensei would want to see their genin team have some ability in working together. It's what my sensei was looking for when I was a genin. Naruto still looked a little puzzled, but his expression cleared in the next moment, accepting this explanation easily. Well, I think what you said before you left really helped. Sasuke to me is being less of a teme and Sakura-chan is being nicer to me. But Kakashi-sensei gets this weird look on his face sometimes. The blonde frowned in concentration and somehow managed to look confused and ticked off at the same time. He also looked a bit like he had been concussed, and Haruki neatly tucked away the amusement threatening to make itself known. And he's only been around an hour late every day. Haruki considered this for a moment. Had he really made that much of a difference? He had only said a few words, but if Kakashi had taken notice of this to the extent that even Naruto had noticed Kakashi's interest, and Sarutobi had even warned him that he would most likely be accosted by the copy nin sometime soon, then the team dynamics of Team 7 must have really changed. All the better, Haruki decided, running a hand through his hair. Team 7 needed to become stronger, especially Naruto and Sakura, and even more importantly create strong bonds before the Chunin exams. Sasuke taking the focus here. Well, maybe I'll see your sensei around soon, Haruki replied aloud. He sounds interesting. I'd like to meet him. That wasn't actually the entire truth. The last time he had seen Hitaki Kakashi had been over 2 years ago on the battlefield. The man had eventually been overwhelmed by enemy forces where he had been stationed, and his Sharingan had burned out. He had fallen at the hands of Madara himself, but not before taking down 2 entire battalions of Auto Nin and Zetsu clones, single-handedly. Not to mention fighting and sealing the Edo Tensei of his father just before. He really was an S-rank shinobi right before the war started, and proved it throughout the war until his untimely demise. Kakashi had died in his arms after forcing Madara to retreat via Obito. His last words to Haruki while choking on his own blood had been an apology for failing to save the Redhead's Genin team. Kakashi's death had hit Konoha hard and Haruki even harder, not just emotionally but strategically. The loss of moral and leadership could be felt all throughout the army. Plus the amount of S-rank shinobi left to contend with Madara and his allies were ever decreasing, and then there was the fact that now lacked the easiest way to counter Obito's eye. He was sealed before he was buried so that Kabuto couldn't get his slimy hands on him. He would be one of the last few that got the luxury of burial. The copy nin had died with regrets, and Haruki had lost another of the handful of people he had been particularly close to. To see him now, alive and healthy and still unmarred by the bloodiest war in all of shinobi history, but not his Kakashi, would hurt. This Kakashi didn't know him, didn't trust him, not like his time's Kakashi whom he had been able to talk to and confide in, and vice versa. In front of him, Naruto was already nodding enthusiastically. Sensei will be coming by tonight. For some reason, he really wants to meet you. Haruki frowned. I guess that's alright, he allowed reluctantly. But I should probably get some rest now. I haven't slept in days. What time is he coming? Naruto rocked back on his heels. He said 8. I don't know if that means he's actually going to arrive at 8 though. Haruki considered this before shrugging and moving to his apartment door. Doesn't matter. I'll be up before then. Just knock on my door when he gets here, alright? Naruto nodded, unlocking his own apartment. Sure, you must be tired after your mission. Sorry for keeping you out here. Haruki waved a dismissive hand as he stepped into his apartment. Don't worry about it, duckling. I'll see you later. He smiled at the wave he received in return before closing the door behind him and stifling a yawn. He didn't really want to sleep. He hadn't wanted to sleep for a long time, but he had felt tired for just as long. He couldn't physically remember the last time his body had been free of the heavy weariness that insisted on making itself at home in his very bones. With a heavy sigh, Haruki tossed his scrolls on the coffee table and placed his shuriken, kunai, and katana aside. Not bothering to change out of his ninja wear or make the trip to the bedroom, the redhead simply dropped onto the couch, throwing an arm over his eyes but making sure he would still have a clear view of the front door. A short nap should be alright. If he was lucky, the nightmares would leave him alone for a little while. Hokage-sama, you wish to speak to me? Sarutobi glanced up with a smile as Hyuga Hiyashi stepped into the office, quietly closing the door behind him. The Sandaime quickly activated the privacy seals before standing and coming out from around his desk. I did, Sarutobi nodded. I will get right to the point as we may be short on time. You recall the Hyuga affair 9 years ago, of course? Hiyashi's already stony countenance shuddered completely. Of course. The affirmation was clipped and cold, but Sarutobi paid it no mind. 8 years ago, the Sandaime continued carefully. He and Hisashi had worked out an abridged version of the recent events before summoning Hisashi to the tower. I sent a spy to Kumo to make sure nothing like it would ever happen again. A week ago, that spy came back, bringing with him some very startling news. Hisashi stiffened at this. Will Kumo try again? Sarutobi quickly shook his head in the negative. No, it isn't that. It seems Kumo has been keeping a secret of great magnitude from the rest of the world and, after my spy relayed the information to me, I sent him back out to retrieve that secret. He has just returned with him earlier today. He paused here, glancing at his private office. I believe showing you would be best. Hisashi-san? Out of the corner of his eye, Sarutobi watched the Hyuga clan head freeze, eyes widening when the small office's door opened and Hisashi stepped out, face calm but an almost amused gleam in his eyes, mixed with a healthy amount of concern as the two brothers stared at each other. It has been a while, Ni-san. Hisashi hesitated when Hisashi made no move to even speak, only continuing to stare at him, his face having paled considerably. The younger twin glanced wryly at the Hokage. Perhaps you should have told him first, after all. Sarutobi shrugged unrepentantly. He rarely ever saw any of the stiff clan heads acting out of character and he needed his own way of keeping himself entertained, Hokage or no. Ni-san, it's me. Are you alright? Hisashi stepped closer and Hisashi finally seemed to pull himself together, rounding on the Hokage with a mixture of confusion and anger blazing in his eyes. What is the meaning of this, Hokage-sama? The clan head bit out, jaw tight. This is not my brother. Hisashi died 9 years ago. Sarutobi raised his hand in a calming gesture and briefly considered calling Haruki back to explain but decided against it. The redhead was still too worn in his eyes and the shadows that he had seen on the man's face when Haruki first arrived had only deepened. He hoped some rest would do him good. Hisashi-san, I assure you, this is your brother. My spy happens to be adept at fuinjutsu and has assured me that the coffin your brother was found in had a life suspension seal placed on it. He managed to break the seal and bring Hisashi-san back safely only hours ago. Kumo managed to save your brother's life after realizing what the caged bird seal would do upon his death and has kept him alive but unconscious ever since while letting the rest of the world believe him to be dead. Hisashi took this in with a heavy frown as he glanced between Sarutobi and his brother. Seeing this, Hisashi stepped forward again and bared his throat, letting the older of the two see the obvious scar marring his skin. I am real, Ni-san, Hisashi reassured softly. And I am back. Hisashi continued staring at his twin, eyeing the scar before glancing at the curse seal that, without a hite, stood out clearly on Hisashi's forehead. The clan head almost stumbled forward a step, unable to look away as if mesmerized. What was the last thing you asked me to do before you took my place 9 years ago? The man's voice was nearly a whisper. Hisashi smiled ever so slightly. I asked you to tell Neji why I chose to take your place. He paused and thought, though knowing you, you probably have not done so out of some sort of misplaced guilt. He was cut off suddenly when Hisashi did stumble forward this time, one hand hovering in front of his younger twin as if afraid that touching him would prove everything to be nothing but a genjutsu. Mere seconds later, the hand reached out and closed tightly around Hisashi's arm, dragging the startled man into a desperate hug. Several feet away, Sarutobi turned to look out the window to give the two men some semblance of privacy. A smile broke out on his face. It had been a long time since Hisashi had shown any outward emotion. He ignored the quiet murmurs behind him as the two Hyugas exchanged words and went over the plan in his head instead. The sound of someone politely clearing their throat behind him caused Sarutobi to turn back, his smile lingering when he saw Hisashi standing with his hands at his side once more, Hisashi a half-step beside him. Both were composed again though far more relaxed and an invisible weight seemed to have been lifted from the Hyuga clan head's shoulders. Could you please explain the circumstances, Hokage-sama? Hisashi restarted, voice somehow warmer while still retaining the neutral formality he typically used. Sarutobi nodded, moving back around his desk. Obviously, the fact that I sent one of my shinobi into Kumo cannot be revealed. My spy came up with a plan that should cover this truth and we, Hisashi-san and I, believe that this is the version we should give the council. Quickly, Sarutobi recounted the plan Haruki had come up with, smoothing over the rougher parts. Hizashi-san will slip back outside the village perhaps 5 to 6 days after Haruki-kun is finished. If we time it correctly, no one will suspect anything. Hiyashi mulled this over silently when Sarutobi finished, glancing briefly at his brother again as he had been every 2 minutes since Hizashi had shown himself. The other 2 occupants of the room politely pretended not to notice, though Hizashi made the effort to stare back reassuringly whenever Hiyashi looked over. "It is a good plan," Hiyashi admitted before glancing around the office. "Where is this spy now?" "I dismissed him for the day," Sarutobi revealed. "He deserves the rest." "What is his name?" Hiyashi persisted. "Kazama Haruki," Hizashi provided helpfully. "A Jonin." Hiyashi frowned. "I have never heard of him." Sarutobi quickly took over again when Hizashi shot a subtle glance at him. "Haruki-kun hasn't been back in Konoha in 8 years, and before that, he was one of the newer Jonins. All his reports to me have been through his summons. But he showed an aptitude for infiltration, so I sent him into Kumo on this long-term mission. I personally erased his files so he wouldn't be traced back to Konoha if he were ever caught. As it is, he's done a wonderful job and even brought back an important figure of our village." Hiyashi tilted his head thoughtfully, looking between his brother and the Hokage as if suspecting something, but Sarutobi kept his face bland and Hizashi blinked calmly back at his brother. The clan head accepted this knowledge with a simple nod after a moment, though Sarutobi had a hidden suspicion that Hiyashi didn't entirely believe the story he had spun. "Very well," Hiyashi continued without giving voice to any thoughts he had on the matter. "If you believe this to be the best course of action, I will accept this plan. I assume Hizashi will stay here in the meantime?" Sarutobi nodded, mildly relieved. Hiyashi was on the council and he might have been inclined to inform at least a few other members or decide that revenge against Kumo immediately would be the best course of action. As if sensing his thoughts, Hiyashi elaborated after a contemplative moment, "You have said that this plan was suggested by Kazama-san. I will not accuse you of anything, Hokage-sama, but there is something not quite right about your description of this spy. I keep an eye on all shinobi above genin level and I have never heard of this man in my life. But it seems as if you feel he needs to be protected from the council, and while this plan gives Konoha an upper hand against Kumogakure, it also conveniently gives Kazama-san a concrete standing in Konoha. If this is so, I will abide by this plan." Sarutobi stared back at Hiyashi impassively, a glimmer of well-hidden curiosity prompting him to question, "If this were true, you would not question Haruki-kun?" Hiyashi arched an eyebrow. "Hokage-sama, you seem to place quite a lot of trust in this Kazama-san." He paused and Sarutobi inclined his head in agreement. "That would be my only concern. If you trust that he would not bring any harm to this village, then who am I to call out the man who has given me back my brother?" Sarutobi blinked, understanding flashing through him as he nodded thoughtfully. Hiyashi now considered himself indebted to Haruki. He wondered what the redhead would think of that. Having a clan head and essentially an entire clan standing behind you could be a powerful weapon. "Alright then," Sarutobi spoke briskly now, nodding to his side office. "If you wish, you could use my office to catch up on recent years." Both Hyugas bowed quietly, Hizashi quirking a wry smile at him before both brothers disappeared into the office, the door shutting behind them and their chakra signals disappearing instantly. Sarutobi deactivated the privacy seals but did not summon his Anbu back in as he settled down to work again. He decided to call Haruki back tomorrow. The situation wasn't so desperate that he would need to send the redhead back out when he had just come home. Naruto perked up when a knock sounded. He glanced at the plastic clock on the kitchen wall. His sensei was only half an hour late. He was sure this was some sort of record. "Hi sensei," Naruto greeted as he opened his door. Kakashi's eyes smiled at him but glanced distractedly next door and the blonde wanted to snicker. Why was his sensei so hung up on talking to Haruki? Haruki-san was taking a nap, Naruto announced as he stepped out of his apartment, closing the door behind him before making his way to his neighbor's apartment. "But he told me to knock when you came over." Kakashi accepted this without a word, standing behind him in his usual slouch as Naruto knocked on the door. There was a moment of silence before muffled footsteps approached and the sound of a lock clicking open was heard and the door swung open. Immediately, Kakashi stiffened from his place behind his student as his eye met a pair of clear cerulean The man had the red hair he had been looking out for, and he had high cheekbones and a deceptively delicate facial structure that seemed distantly familiar to him, but it was the eyes that drew his attention in the end. A pair of blue eyes, a mix of sky and ocean that Kakashi had only ever seen on one other person. Sensei? Kakashi blinked and glanced down, breaking eye contact with the other Jonin to stare inquiringly at his student even as his mind raced. Even Naruto's eyes weren't quite that shade, though Kakashi supposed that could change when he grew up. Haruki had a shock of red hair that reached past his shoulders, but why was Kakashi's first impression of the man a jolting reminder of Namikaze Minato? Sensei, this is Kazama Haruki, Naruto introduced proudly, and Kakashi absently noted that the blonde had probably never had the opportunity to introduce anyone before. Haruki-san, this is Kakashi-sensei, the one I told you about. A slightly stilted silence descended on them as Naruto looked between the two in confusion. In contrast, Kakashi was caught up in that blue gaze again, but this time, now that the shock had died somewhat, he could see several differences between Haruki and his former sensei. Haruki had a more slender, toned build that was compact. He was by no means feminine looking, but the redhead's shoulders were not quite as broad as Minato's, and his stature seemed to imply spry, flexible power rather than explosive speed. If Minato had been a sprinter, then this Haruki has to be a mid to long distance build. Kakashi thought the man should have been tanner as well, since the current paleness of his skin didn't quite seem to suit him, and leaned towards unhealthy, especially with the faint bags under Haruki's eyes that one could only see upon closer observation. The eye color was the only similarity to Minato that Kakashi could see at the moment, though now that he looked more closely into them, he could see the dark, haunted shadows lurking in them that not even his sensei had had after the war. Haruki was Kakashi's age. What had he seen that would leave darkness like that in his eyes? Who was this man? Hitaki-san? The soft tenor snapped him out of his scrutiny, and Kakashi instinctively sent an eye smile at the other Jonin. Kazama-san, I'm Naruto's sensei, as I'm sure you've heard. I heard you were talking to my cute students and they seemed to take you word to heart, so I wanted to meet you. Haruki studied him for a moment, head tilting in a considering movement as he leaned against the doorframe. Are you angry? Kakashi blinked. Did he seem angry? He was honestly just curious about the redhead. He sighed inwardly. This was what he got for trying to be straightforward. He should just return to being himself. No doubt, it would tick the other man off in no time. With that thought, he whipped out his orange book, ignoring the groan from Naruto as he flipped it open without reservation. No, he assured cheerfully as he focused on his precious Icha. Just curious. A long silence followed, and Kakashi could see Naruto face palming over the top of his book. He could also feel Haruki's stare on him, and he glanced up to make sure he hadn't scarred the man too much. Again, he was surprised and could only blink when he caught sight of the definitely fond smile playing on Haruki's lips, a touch of wistfulness now lingering in his eyes. It's nice to meet you, Haruki offered when he saw that he had Kakashi's full, if somewhat bewildered, attention again. The redhead glanced down at Naruto and reached out to ruffle his hair. I've boiled water for ramen. Would the two of you like to join me? Naruto brightened immediately and nodded enthusiastically. Haruki only smiled again and stepped aside to let the blonde in. He glanced questioningly at the copy Nen, and Kakashi, after a moment of contemplation, nodded. He wasn't in the habit of accepting dinner invitations from near strangers, but there was something soothing about this man's aura that should have put him on alert but only served to relax him instead. Plus, he had wanted to find out more about this man, and there really was no better time than the present. 3/4 of an hour later had both Haruki and Kakashi staring with slightly morbid fascination as Naruto downed his 17th bowl of instant ramen. Ah, I'm full, the blonde finally announced, sitting back as he set down the now empty bowl. Where does it all go? You sure you don't want one more? Haruki and Kakashi glanced at each other, exchanging looks of wry amusement as Naruto pouted at them. In the span of 45 minutes, the two adults had fallen into a quiet sort of camaraderie, exchanging casual words now and then but comfortable when silence fell between them as they listened to Naruto babble about his training in between slurps of ramen. Kakashi didn't think he had ever taken to anyone so quickly, not even Minato, but the redhead didn't seem to mind his reading material when he brought it out for a while during the meal. Nor did he seem at all offended when Kakashi pulled his, "I was reading and I was definitely listening to you, but I'm going to pretend I wasn't just to piss you off" routine after Haruki had questioned him on his reasons for being late all the time. Instead, Haruki had only nodded as if Kakashi had actually told the man that he didn't want to talk about it and had promptly done as he wished and changed the subject. But what confused Kakashi the most were the expressions on the redhead's face when Haruki thought the copy nin wasn't looking. When he was supposedly immersed in his icha-icha, sometimes, out of the corner of his eye, he would see flashes of emotion cross the other Jonin's face. A wistful sort of affection several times, even a desperate kind of fear on occasion, and once, the one that alarmed the copy nin more than any of the other expressions, a deep, grieving sorrow when Kakashi had commented offhandedly that he would rather go down fighting than spend any time in a hospital surrounded by nurses who didn't even have the decency to let him keep his reading material while he was there. It had been a joke really, after Naruto had wondered aloud whether or not it would bore him to death if he ever had to spend time in the hospital after a mission. Haruki had flinched minutely at this as if he had been struck, and Kakashi had found himself hastily steering the conversation away after that. "Haruki-san, Team 7 took a photo the other day," Naruto was now saying, already on his feet. "Do you want to see?" The faint half-smile that was already becoming familiar to Kakashi appeared on the redhead's face. "Sure, why don't you go get it while I clear the table?" The blonde scratched his head for a second before smiling sheepishly up at Haruki. "It might take a while. I haven't gotten a picture frame for it yet, so I put it somewhere in my room. Be back soon." With that said, the boy scampered out of the kitchen, his full stomach doing nothing to slow him down. As Haruki stood up to gather the empty plastic bowls of instant ramen, Kakashi rose as well and pulled over the garbage can before giving the man a hand. Haruki looked faintly surprised but nodded a silent thanks instead, and the two worked in silence until the table was cleared. "So what did you say to my students?" Kakashi asked when they moved into the sitting room. He noted the Jonin vest thrown over the back of the couch on one end and quickly took the other side of the couch, taking in the katana leaning against the wall in one corner of the room. Haruki shrugged, sitting down as well. "Nothing special. I told them to work together. That working as a team would make them stronger, and that being able to use your teammates' strengths while covering for their weaknesses, as well as letting them do the same for you in return, is a testament to how strong you are." His eyes grew distant. "I told them that pride and arrogance had no place on a team if it got in the way of protecting your teammates. That those would just be weaknesses in the end, and weaker than those that didn't know better because they are without excuse." Kakashi stared at the redhead until Haruki actually turned to stare back. The copy nin wondered idly if Haruki had Sasuke in mind when he had given that last piece of advice. "You'd make a good sensei," he finally said, not bothering to hide the respect in his voice at the obvious sincerity that had been in Haruki's words. He didn't expect the frown that appeared after he spoke. "I wouldn't," the redhead voiced with quiet certainty. He seemed about to say something else before suddenly closing his mouth again, eyes sharpening, and in the sudden silence, the two Jonins heard a faint crash of broken glass next door. Haruki was on his feet and at his door in a flash, Kakashi only a step behind him. Outside, Naruto's door was open and jeering voices could be heard. A sharp crack of skin on skin reached their ears. "Got some new things since we last visited, demon? Trash like you shouldn't waste space like this. It's too good for you. You don't deserve to get your murdering hands on such good merchandise." The man who had spoken bent down to pick up a plate off the ground that hadn't broken yet. He was just about to throw it when steel-like fingers curled around his wrist and, in one decisive twist, broke it without effort. The man screamed, plate slipping from his hand only to be neatly caught as the intruder spun around, clutching his arm and backing up to stand with the other two that had come with him. "You bast." The words died in his throat, air freezing in his lungs when he met an icy gaze, pinning all three men in place with cold efficiency. Behind Haruki, Kakashi quickly moved to the blonde crouching wide-eyed in a corner of the apartment, an ugly bruise already blossoming on one cheek. With his lips set in a thin line behind his mask, the copy nin crouched down beside his student, doing a quick scan for any other injuries and breathing a small sigh of relief when he found none. Seeing Naruto's attention completely focused on his red-haired neighbor, Kakashi too turned back to Haruki, staring dispassionately at the three intruders cowering in front of the redhead. He couldn't quite bring himself to pity them. Haruki was currently exuding a frigid rage, tightly reined in, but curiously enough, his body was still relaxed. Moving Naruto to the side, Kakashi just managed to catch a glimpse of the redhead's face and had to suppress a shudder. While Haruki's visage remained deadly still, it was the eyes that seemed to bring the most fear to the men in front of him. Unforgiving and ruthless, the usual cerulean had darkened to a near twilight blue, almost demonic in its nature. "Get out!" The order, for it could be mistaken for nothing else, had not been shouted, nor had Haruki snarled at them. In that even, calm tone Kakashi had grown used to earlier that evening, the only difference being the impassive steel that now edged his voice, Haruki had the men scrambling for the door, giving the redhead a wide berth. "I have spared you this night, though by Konoha law I have every right to kill you where you stand however I see fit. If you or any of your friends ever come back regardless of the reason," Haruki's voice, still soft, froze the men in their tracks again as they reached the door. Bottomless Indigo turned to stare at them. "I will hunt you down, and you will only live long enough to regret every action you ever took against this boy." Haruki held their gazes for a moment longer, letting the promise sink in. And then the redhead blinked and the spell broke, and the men were gone a fraction of a second later, fleeing the apartment building as if the devil itself was at their heels. It might as well have been, Kakashi thought with satisfied amusement, visible eyes studying the figure still facing away from them before glancing down at Naruto. The blonde was staring open-mouthed at the redhead, and Kakashi suspected that there might even be stars in the boy's awestruck eyes at the moment. "Naruto!" Haruki suddenly barked and the blonde jumped from his spot. "Why yeah? Do you know what Fuinjutsu is?" This question was so completely off-topic that even Kakashi blinked in confusion for a moment. Naruto scratched his head. No? Doesn't matter," Haruki snapped, finally turning around. The ice had melted from the man's eyes, leaving only a protective ferocity behind. "You'll learn one day. For now, I'll maintain the seals on this place." With that said, the redhead stalked out of the apartment, leaving both Naruto and Kakashi to scramble after him.